Look at this brave group. Thank you so much for coming in this morning. We honestly weren't certain how many people would show up, how many people would brave the snow, and what it was going to look like out there. We had about 55 people registered for the event. So you were the brave few that are going to get a huge leg up, a huge advance in the challenge, and the ability to interact with some of our subject matter experts today. So thank you so much for being here. Couple logistics before we get going. If you need them, restrooms are out the doors to the right. Take the first hallway and you'll see them right there. After our lightning talks are over, we're going to have some pizza and stuff delivered and in the back so that you can fill your bellies before the second half of today. And because of the weather, we are only going to have one or two of our presenters here in person. The vast majority of the presenters, so that they didn't have to get out on the road and drive around, they were a little nervous about that and we didn't want to ask that of them, are going to be coming in through Zoom though. So they're going to still be able to do their lightning talks, talk with you, and then we're going to do a slight modification of what the original plan was. We'll have a Q&A session where you can ask them directly some questions, interact with them, get a little bit more detail about what they see as the real problems you should be working on. After that, we will break into a little bit of a small group session, and given the size or number of people here, it will be a small group session. We'll talk through things a little bit, and then we'll kind of turn that into a consultation session, where myself and a few others will be here to help talk you through your ideas, give you direct feedback, help walk you through iterations on your ideas, and give you the best leg up for the Nittany AI Challenge this year. So that's kind of the purpose and intent of the day. If you haven't met me before, my name is Brad Zdenek. I'm the innovation strategist with the Nittany AI Alliance. I have the pleasure of running the Nittany AI Challenge and being able to work directly with all of our participants, all of our teams. It is a phenomenal job because it is so much fun being able to work with you, with your passion, your innovation, your drive and motivation and your skills. And what I'm able to see every single year student teams come up with. Probably the best story, one of the best stories we have out of the challenge was 2 years ago, where we had one of our student teams at the end who had made it all the way through the challenge, standing up on stage and gave their presentation. And we had in the audience a number of representatives from our partners, and one of those partners was Google. And there were a couple members from Google there, and the team finished their presentation, and I got up on stage. I said, all right, time for questions. Who has a question? And a hand from one of the Google reps shot up in the air. And I said, hey, you question? I said, I actually don't have a question. I've got a comment. I've worked in this space for 15 years now. I've seen a lot of solutions trying to do what you just did, talking to that team. And this is the best one I have ever seen. Could you imagine the feeling that those individuals had up on stage? The kicker to that is that same team at the very beginning of the challenge thought about not doing it because they didn't think they were capable. The fact that you are sitting here today and that you're willing to try, that willing to push yourselves and do this, has you halfway to being up on stage and then getting that kind of compliment. So thank you for being here. We're going to start with just some context of why I think you should be here, whether you know it or not. So a couple numbers, couple facts. Right now, or I'm sorry, in the next 2 years, about 20% of workers are going to be using artificial intelligence in their daily work life. That means that particularly if you're a freshman or a sophomore and you're more than 2 years out from being in that workforce, AI is going to be a major player, major disruptor within the work that you are going to be doing. And the thing is, this is not a statistic for STEM fields. This is not a statistic for computer science fields. This is not a statistic for programmers. This is across industries. It doesn't matter if you're in hospitality, if you're in fine art, if you're in graphic design, if you are in business. 20% in 2 years are going to be using AI. Bigger number, a more important number, is that right now 87% of companies are working on some sort of application of advanced technologies, transformative technologies, led by the use of artificial intelligence. That means 4 or 5 years out, it is pretty much a guarantee that you are going to be using some sort of AI in your work. Now, as Penn State, if we graduate you without having any sort of exposure to AI, quite honestly, we're doing you a disservice. And that's part of why we're here. Because the first thing that people think is, well, that's not me. I'm going to be an attorney, or I'm going to be a graphic designer, or I'm going to be, insert your field there. So I want to give you a couple of examples of ways AI is being used that you may not have thought of or be aware of. Anyone have an idea or comment on this, thought on what this is or why I'm showing it to you right now? What do you think?
It's visualizations and stories where like you can try different clothes on your body and like see how they fit like on websites.
That is a phenomenal use of artificial intelligence. That is not this, but that's a good idea. And it's something that's being used right now and is a perfect example of the way AI is being used, computer vision is being used to increase sales in that particular business. You do not see a single real person here. Not a person here is real. Every single individual on there, every single piece of clothing was completely and totally generated by an artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence designed that clothing and created those people. There was not a fashion designer that created any of that, said, we're going to put a gray shirt with a red and blue stripe going across it. What the AI did was looked across millions and millions of images and was able to identify what type of clothing would sell, what kind of clothing would be popular, and then created wholly new types of clothing, and then created virtual models to be able to put them on. Imagine if you are in fashion design and you think to yourself, that's a creative space. AI is not going to impact me. Yes, it is. And I think you gave another perfect example of it as well. This means a lot to me because on the left is a kind of artist that I am. But what does it mean to create art? What does it mean to be an artist? When what you can do is what's on the left, and what is created and what you can sell is what's on the right. There are a lot of big questions here. Is this creation? Is this art? We could debate all those things all day long. What doesn't change is the fact that this is real. And these are technologies that are available right now. In fact, last year, the first piece of completely AI-generated art, you're looking at it, was sold at auction for $25 million last January. This is it. That was not created by a human being. Unless, well, again, this is where we can debate. There was an algorithm created by a human being that generated this piece of artwork. Without being told, draw a person and a face in this particular style, the algorithm decided, I use a lot of air quotes today, decided to do this. And again, it sold for $25 million, significantly disrupting the fine art world. But let's get down to something that you might be thinking. Maybe you're an attorney. In fact, my brother is an attorney, real estate law. He has actually started to leave his attorney business, and he is becoming a real estate agent. One of the primary reasons for that is because he saw the writing on the wall. This is an example of a tool that was built to look at what are called non-disclosure agreements, a very common thing within business. You sign these NDAs when you're working with outside organizations, and it makes certain that your intellectual property is protected. Excuse me. One of the things that attorneys have to do is they have to look at those NDAs and see if there are any loopholes, any problems. So what this company did was they created an AI agent. And they took NDAs and gave them to a set of a dozen lawyers and sent those same NDAs through their tool. The artificial intelligence, their agent, was able to identify loopholes within those NDAs with 94% accuracy. The team of 12 lawyers had 85% accuracy. Again, significantly disrupting that field. Now, I am not one of those doomsayer people who says, you know, you're not going to have a job. Don't become an attorney because you're not going to have a job. Don't become an artist because it's irrelevant. That's not true. But what is true is that AI is not going to replace a doctor, but a doctor who uses AI is going to replace one that doesn't. Insert your field into that statement, and it's probably just as true. So that is what today and this challenge and we are all about, is helping you understand how it can impact your life. But I want to go beyond careers for a second to the thing that I said I'm not a doomsayer, but this is the one that scares me. So this is an example of a relatively recent advancement in AI, an application of AI, that is able to take a single static image. Imagine any of the hundreds or thousands of images you have on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, is able to take a single image and turn it into a moving video. Imagine if anyone could go onto your Instagram feed, pull off a single photo of you, and create a moving video of you saying and doing whatever they want you to do. This is the kind of technology that is available and is continuing to develop. Imagine yourself as a citizen in a democracy in the modern age with that technology. Can you trust what you see? Right now you look at it and the Mona Lisa is all pixelated and you're like, oh yeah, that's fake. I don't know what that is. But 5 years from now, with better original images, it's going to become more and more challenging. So this is why we have to know about AI. You don't have to be a programmer. You don't have to be able to build the algorithms, but you have to be able to understand what it is and how it can impact you and what its affordances are, what it does. So that's why we exist. We're the Nittany AI Alliance. We're a unit here at Penn State out of Penn State Outreach, and we are focused in on creating new and engaging opportunities to get you working with AI. Like I said, not always creating it, not doing the programming side always, although that's critical and important, but to just get you engaged in it. And the way we do that is we try to bring together different groups to work together. You, students, we bring together faculty, we bring together as subject matter experts, we bring together staff as subject matter experts, and we bring in industry partners who are out there working on it, doing it right now, and have the tools for you to use. So we bring all those individuals together, and today we're talking about one of the ways we do that, which is within the challenge. So the challenge has run for 3 years now. This is our 4th year. For the first 3 years, we were extremely successful in being focused on one thing, which was improving Penn State. The challenge for the last 3 years has been think of a problem at Penn State and create a solution for it using AI. Usually people mumble about line path when I say that. That was the thing that everybody was always, it was either that or finding a seat at the local bar. So those are the two things that we saw very often. But we kind of did that for 3 years and we said, we can be bigger, we can do more. And quite honestly, maybe we can give you an opportunity to do something you're really passionate about and fit it within the challenge. So we opened up the aperture and we said, this year, we're doing AI for good. This is still including education, so you can still do something that improves Penn State. But in addition to that, we challenge you to think about problems in the fields of health, humanitarianism, sustainability, climate change, or education. It doesn't have to fit neatly in any of those. That's just a way of thinking it. Usually what I say is if you're doing something that improves the world or the people or animals or climate in it, that's AI for good, and you'll fit. Throughout that challenge, what we do is we offer $50,000 in awards for you to go from an idea to building a prototype to building a minimal viable product throughout that process. What we're doing today is giving you some ideas right from the subject matter experts about where your efforts would be best placed and to help you make some connections possibly for people that can mentor you and help you, or maybe even find teammates that you'd want to work with throughout this process. But I'm going to get things kickstarted a little bit with a few different ideas of ways AI is being applied within AI for good right now. A pervasive issue throughout the world is access to medical care and medical technology. Throughout the world, there are many areas, particularly in remote and rural areas, where being able to get to a doctor or medical equipment may translate into hour-long or at times even days-long travel to be able to get to the medical resources that you need. There is a very preventable form of vision impairment that is caused by diabetes. The problem is being able to identify it early enough to be able to address it. So there is an AI application that was created that is able to run right on your smartphone, where you can take a smartphone wherever you are in the world, which is prevalent and available in many places where medical care is not, take a small cup that attaches to the camera sensor. You can take that and put it up to an individual's eye, and the algorithm is able to look inside your eye and be able to identify early stages of diabetes-caused vision impairment, so that an individual would know that they then do have to travel to that medical intervention that could help them address it and maintain their eyesight. This is something that can change the world within a smartphone, using the power of a machine learning algorithm. Here is one, this is actually a company, One Concern, where what they've done is they have created a tool that can predict disasters before they happen. And once they do happen, identify where the areas of severity are to be able to direct first responders. So here you have an example of Seattle and flood information. Within here, you can see the various areas where high levels of flooding are likely to occur and points of population density so that first responders know where to go to save the largest number of people. Because one of the biggest problems within a natural disaster, earthquake, flood, whatever, is being able to know where to send first responders to have the greatest impact. This AI can figure that out in a heartbeat. Imagine the number of lives saved by the application of this type of technology across the world. Very topical. If you've seen any of the news, you look at Australia right now, it's on fire, literally. One of the ways AI is being used right now is by using drones to fly over areas either before a fire or during a fire and identify where is it likely to occur, where is it likely to be severe, and third, once a fire does start, where should the fire mitigation efforts be placed? Where should they be dropping the fire retardants to have the greatest impact? So rather than being blind as to the best impact in using the experience of firefighters to make their best guesses, we're able to take an enormous amount of data in very quickly and be able to decide how do we intervene to stop these fires. This is technology being used right now. This is another one. Any of you have an iOS device, you can download this right now. Microsoft created an application where you can essentially translate the visual world into an auditory world for those with vision impairments. So again, taking your phone with your app, I can point it and it say person, desk. I can take a menu in a restaurant, have it in front of me, point my phone at it, and it will read the menu for me. Imagine going into a mom and pop restaurant where they don't have Braille menus. How do you order? You can't by yourself without having to ask someone, hey, can you tell me what you have? Ask your server. That opens up the world for individuals with visual impairments and allows them to see the world through their ears. It is an app that you can get for free right now. So these are all ideas that we're going to kind of build upon today to enter into the challenge. The challenge starts January 31st with the submission deadline for the ideas. All you need at this phase is an idea. We ask you, what's the problem you want to address and why is it a problem? What's your solution? Notice we haven't even talked about technology yet. What's your solution? Who's your team, which is critical? And then finally, how are you using AI to do that? You submit that by 11:59 p.m. on January 31st. We pick 20 teams and we award each one of the 20 teams $500. We say, great job. Now, make it, build it, make a prototype. This is where the team aspect of this comes in, because I don't know, let me ask, who in here has experience with writing artificial intelligence or writing Python code, algorithms, whatever? Okay, a little bit. So I see a number of hands who are not up. Notice each other, because you'll need each other to build a good team to be able to create a prototype. April 1st, you demo your prototype and you show that off, and we will pick 10 teams and give them $1,500 each to build a minimal viable product. Now throughout this, these are all awards. You can use the money as you like because our partnering companies bring the resources you need to the table to be able to do the development. So they give you free credits on their platforms, so you don't have to pay a penny to actually create these things, write these things, host these programs. These companies will provide you access to their tools to be able to do that. The money you can use as you like. Some individuals are business individuals and decide are entrepreneurs and want to start a business, and so they reinvest those funds into their idea. Other people use it for other uses. That is completely up to you. These are the partners we work with, and you'll recognize a couple of them. I'm sure you probably know Google, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon. A few of them you may not have heard of before that you'll get a chance to work with throughout the challenge, and a couple different areas, a couple different organizations that are focused on AI for good, that can give you some assistance, give you some help, and access to data, which is really important. And in the end, the bottom line is, this could be you, standing up on stage with a big fake check with a dollar amount set on it. And you've taken the first step to getting there right now. A couple pro tips before we hand it off to our subject matter experts for the day, just to think about as you were going through the day today. Number one, you're here, you've got a jump start on things, take advantage of today. You already braved the cold and the weather to get here, so kudos to you. Take advantage of today, really engage, ask questions, find team members, talk to each other, see what you can do to get started right now. One of the other things is that some people come in here and say, I've got my idea already. You probably do. You might have some sort of inkling of what your passion is, the thing you want to work on, but be open to the fact that your first idea is probably not the greatest. That is true across the board. It is when you get to that 5th, 6th, 7th iteration of an idea is when you really start to get in on something. So work through that today. Don't be defensive of your idea. We've got subject matter experts here who live and breathe in these fields. They will help you. They will ask you tough questions. They will push you. Let them do that. Talk to each other. Help build a stellar team that you can work together with. And then finally, even though it's called the Nittany AI Challenge, this is not a technology challenge. This is about learning about the technologies, not necessarily about advancing the bleeding edge of the technology. This is an 8-month process. If you make it through all the steps, you will have a tough time working on something for 8 months if you don't care about it. Start with the why. Why are you doing it? Why is it important to you? Why should anybody care? If it's something that can get you out of bed in the morning to work on, that's a great start. So start with why, and then let's figure out how the technology fits. So with that,
just real quick, you want to mention that you talked about teams a little bit. You want to mention the Teams tool and how they can...
We'll get to that.
Okay.
So to start the day talking through our ideas, we have the pleasure of having a representative from the Sustainability Institute here at Penn State, who is joining us. And she's going to give a little bit of, not necessarily at this very point, the idea itself, but where are the possibilities here? Where does she see this field? And where are the possibilities for AI to really impact the world, to change the world with the idea you might have? So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Megan Hoskins, who is a Director of Operations and Partnerships at Penn State Sustainability Institute. And she's going to talk to us today very quickly about call to action AI for good. Megan?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep, sound great.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks for coming out and in this terrible weather or beautiful weather, whichever one is your perspective. And thanks for having me. So like Brad said, I'm Megan Hoskins. I'm the Director of Operations and Partnerships here at the Sustainability Institute. I'm also the chair of, we have a Sustainable Operations Council here at Penn State. So I work closely with the operations folks from around the university. So I can try to link ideas with operations areas if I can. So I'm let's see if I can get my, there it goes. Okay. So here's my agenda. What is sustainability? Just give a brief overview of what that kind of means for us. Talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, which are from the United Nations. And then I'm going to talk about kind of my ideas for where AI can fit in. And I am not very familiar with AI. It's kind of new to me, so I'll just throw out some of my ideas, and then I'm going to end with a cautionary note and a couple of resources. All right, so what does sustainability mean to you? Sustainability is, it can be a personalized, you can think about it as a personalized thing. What do you need is the same thing as what all of us need, right? We all need clean air and clean water. We need, hopefully, food with good nutrition. We need some housing, transportation, hopefully a job and education, and a safe and just place to live and work and play. So what does sustainability now mean for the planet with so many of us who need to be sustained? The United Nations sent out an urgent call for action, recognizing that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. This is a big job. Here are a couple of other quotes from different people talking about sustainable development. It's been around for a long time. This one's 1987. People have been thinking about this well before that as well. I really like this image of thinking about people, planet, and profit, and we really have to get all three of these things right to not just have a bearable or viable planet. We want something that's really sustainable. So the United Nations came together and a healthy planet by 2030. And these are the Sustainable Development Goals. 192 countries came together and agreed on these Sustainable Development Goals. It's kind of a big deal. 192 countries don't really agree on much, usually. So I'm just going to go through what the Sustainable Development Goals are very quickly. So goal number 1 is no poverty. 2 is zero hunger. Goal 3 is health and well-being. And the ones that have the boxes around them are the ones that match up with what Brad was talking about as kind of the emphasis for AI, for the challenge anyway. So good health and well-being is 3. 4 is quality education. 5 is gender equality. 6 is clean water and sanitation. 7 is affordable and clean energy. 8 is decent work and economic growth. 9 is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. 10 is reducing inequalities. 11 is sustainable cities and communities. 12 is responsible consumption and production. 13 is climate action and urgent climate action. 14 is conserving life below water. And 15 is life on land. 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And 17 is partnerships for the goals. So you can see that they kind of build on each other. We have to think about how our planet is going to survive, and then how the planet can help us with our society. And then we also need economic growth, and we need to work together to get all of these done. This is a glimpse of where our planet is now. Some people have been looking into planetary boundaries, they're calling them. So these are things that if we breach them, we're taking away from our future, essentially. So all the areas that they looked at are around the outside of the circle, freshwater use, land system change, etc. And you can see the red lines that come all the way out to the edges planetary boundaries. So our genetic diversity will probably never get that back. Our nitrogen cycle is definitely out of whack, and our phosphorus cycle as well. And then the yellow bars that are kind of getting out towards the red, those are the ones that we're getting close to breaching our planetary boundaries. So land system change and climate change are 2 of the big ones there. So we have some work to do. So thinking more locally now, where are we in Pennsylvania? A couple years ago, a group did a ranking of the Sustainable Development Goals for all the states in the US. Pennsylvania is a very large producer of energy, and we're also a very big emitter of carbon dioxide. And actually, for all of the goals, there is not one goal that we're on target to meet by 2030. We're one of 19 states who are that way. We're ranked, out of the 50 states, we're ranked number 30, which is not really a great place to be. So thinking locally or thinking globally and acting locally can have quite a big impact. So where are we now? They call this the donut on the left here. And again, the outside edge is kind of where those planetary boundaries are again. And the inside is kind of where we want to be. We want to live inside our means on the planet. So we've entered the Anthropocene, we call it. So humans are driving nature now. There are so many of us. The 2050 population is headed to be 10 billion. And that's a lot of people for our planet. It's also doubling the global economy. We have a lot of debt and a lot of inequality. So the richest 8 people have the same amount of wealth as the poorest 50% of people. That's a big number. So again, there's a lot of places to work here. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement. So where does AI fit into this conversation? So the World Economic, I put a link to it there at the bottom of the slide. I recommend reading this report. It's pretty good. These are the areas that they thought that AI could be a big game changer in. And so I think it's worth probably just reading the whole report because there's a lot there. I thought what I could do is break down or emphasize some of the areas that Brad was saying was highlighted in the challenge. So education is one of them, and thinking kind of on a local level. At Penn State, we have 100,000 students at any one time. So do all these students know about the planetary health that I just went through and how they influence it? This is a pretty big opportunity to educate a lot of people who are going out into the workforce and into the world to be game changers. So how could AI help them understand and maybe even help them be part of the solution? So I just put a couple of ideas in here. You know, there's lots of data being collected everywhere now. Are there ways that we can analyze personal activities, determine the impact, and then educate people about what impact they are having? And then in an education sense, there are courses and curricula here at Penn State, you know, and elsewhere, but thinking about Penn State, could we analyze the data around curriculum and figure out what degrees and programs are in areas in sustainability that people could kind of stitch together a curriculum that works for them? Also suggesting education opportunities with sustainability interest areas by analyzing social media posts. And these are just kind of ideas I thought I would throw out. So in this health space, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think you'll hear about some of it today from some of the other speakers. But kind of the question, how can we make health data actionable to help humanity and the world? Is there a way to predict outbreaks? Are diagnosing care opportunities? I've been thinking a lot about the microbiome lately. It's kind of a big area that has, I think, a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of data that's being collected. Same with genetics and different infectious diseases. And then also thinking about how can we help people connect their health with the health of the planet? You know, we can't get along without fresh water. And fresh water depends on a lot of Earth systems. So is there a way to kind of make connections for people? Humanitarianism was one of the other focus areas. I put in reduced inequalities for that one, which is the SDG 10. I think you could probably link humanitarianism to most of the SDGs, but that's the one I was thinking about. So thinking about, you know, how can we use AI to help humanity, kind of help humans help each other? So thinking about, are there lessons learned in developed nations that can be translated to developing nations, so that they can learn lessons maybe in a better way than what we did. And can we connect people who have resources to people who don't have resources? So maybe are there ways, you know, people who are in more well-off communities, connecting them even to less well-off people in their own communities? Also, maybe, you know, is there a way to use AI to analyze people's activity and think for them a little bit on what kind of good causes they could support? Kind of take a little bit of the work out of the effort for them. So climate change is another big one, I think. I put the World Economic Forum areas over on the right, and kind of dug in a little bit deeper on some of these. So thinking about clean power. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is that, you know, this is about climate action. This slide is about climate action, but thinking about the whole storm today got me thinking about, are there ways that we can better prepare as well for the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing? Are there ways to better predict weather events or fire events, things like that? Kind of more locally, thinking about winter weather especially, but things are less predictable than they used to be. So is there a way that AI can help us operate more efficiently even with unpredictable weather events? So just another thought. But on the climate change side, thinking about clean power, there's a lot of opportunity in all of these spaces. So clean power, can we make renewable energy more predictable? One of the things that is hard to integrate renewable energy into the electric grid is due to the unpredictable nature of, you know, the sun resource. If a cloud is going to come by, the electricity production is going to drop off precipitously. So how can you plan for those and have backups in place that don't require burning fossil fuels to come up with that? So if we have better predictions, that could help with integration of clean power. Transportation, there's a lot of opportunity in the transportation world. And actually I'm gonna do a lightning talk later about this one, so I won't talk about it now. Consumption and production, can we connect producers and consumers more efficiently and help with circularizing the economy? Land use changes, I think you're gonna hear some other folks talk about land use, but how do we use land for both human and ecological systems? And how do we plan for that well? Smart cities and homes, there's a lot of you know, IoT work going on. So there's a lot of data that's going to be collected now and in the future. And how do we helps us use our resources efficiently, but also encouraging healthy connections. You know, we don't want people to just stay home and not do anything. We want people to get out and be a part of their communities and nature. So how do we do both? So those are kind of thoughts in that area. On my cautionary note, AI, just in general, uses computers, obviously, which use energy, which produce greenhouse gas emissions, which have a negative effect on climate change. But AI can also be used to solve problems, which can help people maybe have a positive impact against climate change. So I guess my cautionary note is also hopefully an inspiring one. Use your power for good and use it as efficiently as possible. And I really like the eBay's VP. I read this quote from him: be efficient, be smart, use less, and do more. And he was talking about AI at the time. So I agree. Resources, if I can go. Oh, whoops. Went too far. There we go. So a couple of resources I just wanted to end with. The Microsoft has an AI for Earth, which maybe you guys have already seen, but they have a lot of great, both already developed AI for Earth techniques, but then they also have resources available for people, including additional funding and technical. The other one I wanted to point out on the bottom right is you can actually go to this website and think about or calculate how much carbon footprint your AI solution will have. So there's a tool online that you can compute your own emissions from your project. So I thought that was kind of neat. And then the other one I just want to make sure everybody's aware of, Project Drawdown at the top there is it's a project that came about a few years ago. It was started by Paul Hawkins, who came to the university to give a talk, but he started this sort of quest to put together the top solutions to climate change and thinking about not just reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but really drawing down past zero so that we're actually drawing more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're putting into it. He took, I think it's 100 solutions for doing that. So it includes things that are technological that you would think of, like wind turbines and solar power, but it also has things like educating girls and reducing food waste and things like that. So there are at least 100 ideas on that website. Penn State has also partnered with Project Drawdown. So last fall we had the first research event on Drawdown here at University Park, and there was also a cohort of undergraduate interns who worked over the summer, and that will likely be happening again this summer. So thinking about Drawdown and thinking about Drawdown for Penn State has also been thrown around. So that is all I have. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much. And if we have any questions in the room, we do have remote audience. In fact, there's a group at Barron that's watching in, about 20 people there. So if you have questions, I just ask that you wait for the mic to come to you for a second. So any questions for Megan? And we'll get into some more specific ideas in a minute, but anything for what she has presented so far? Yeah, Darren.
I would just ask about
Hi, Megan. This is Darren. I was just wondering, there's a lot of excellent resources here. I know the teams are also going to be looking at any data sources that may be available associated with these sort of things. Any suggestions there on the data source side?
I guess it depends on what kind of data you're interested in. If it's Penn State related, like Penn State operations, there's a lot of data that gets collected that I can be in contact with folks if, once a specific data item is, I can look into it, but without knowing specifics, all I can say is most of the time, the operations staff at Penn State are very willing to share data.
Excellent, thank you.
And so everyone is aware, one of the things that we do throughout the challenge on our end is as data needs come up, what we do is we do our best to be able to connect you with the resources, those who own it or control it. There is never a guarantee, there is never a promise, but we will do everything we can to try to connect you up with those resources. And I know Megan and her colleagues have said that they are willing to help out as well. So if you have specific needs as you build out your idea, we can do everything we can to try to get that for you. So Megan, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know you're going to be coming back in just a second for your lightning talk, but I want to thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So what we are going to do now is we're going to move in quickly to some lightning talks. So Megan did a great job of kind of getting us started getting us some ideas kind of on the top level. Now what we have is we have a series of 9 individuals who are subject matter experts here at the university and outside the university affiliated with us that have their specific perspectives on some of the areas where your time would be best spent or what the real problems are in these areas. One of the things we have seen in the past is that you might be really passionate about something that bothers you, what the problem is. But because you don't live it, because you don't breathe it, because it's not what you do day in and day out usually, you don't necessarily have a full vision of what the solution could be. However, there are people here at the university that understand what those solutions could be. And what they're going to do now is kind of give you some of that perspective. I'll give you one specific example here to kind of put that in context. One of the things that we've often seen in the past related to Penn State and improving Penn State has been advising. We hear again and again, people say, it takes too long to get to my advisor doesn't give me the answers that I'm looking for, advising needs to be improved. And so the solutions they were coming up with had to do with generating knowledge for the advisors, giving them the better answers or giving the answers directly to the students. The real problem is that the advisors here at Penn State have enormous caseloads, enormous numbers of people that they serve. It's a time management or a time availability issue, a capacity issue. That's where the solutions were. But what our teams in the past would sometimes focus in on was on the other side about the knowledge. The knowledge was there. They just didn't have the time to be able to devote to give that to you. So what the lightning talks are going to allow you to do is give you a sense of where the actual solutions may lie, as well as giving you some sense of where the opportunities it may lie, and possibly routes not to go down, because either the data are not available, or it's just messy, or there's already a solution out there, or giving you some of that perspective. So with that, we'll start walking through our presenters. Our first presenter that we have today, Katie, if you don't mind advancing that. There we go. We have Margot Kay. Margot is an associate professor of forest ecology here at Penn State University, and she's going to give you a little bit of perspective from where she lives. Margot?
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me today. And Megan, thanks for that talk. It gave me a lot to think about. So I am a faculty in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management. And as you can see, I work in forest ecology. And before I actually start talking about trees themselves, I want to go back to that higher level a little bit where Megan was talking and think about global climate change. And so I think everybody in the room probably knows that one of the biggest factors driving global climate change is an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide. Now, you probably also know that the main source of that carbon dioxide is from human emissions, fossil fuel burning, biomass burning. So that's a big source of the carbon, but what we want to think about is how we can get carbon out of the atmosphere. And so we have oceans taking up carbon, but on land, the main process of carbon being taken out of the atmosphere is photosynthesis. So we have plants fixing carbon when they grow, and they fix that carbon in their plant biomass. So that might be crops, that might be trees. They also fix carbon in their roots. They put carbon into the soil. And so that's our sponge that can take carbon out of the atmosphere. And so if we're concerned, obviously, with global change, and we want to start thinking about how we can mitigate some of these effects, we really need to start understanding the processes. So if we think about forests specifically and their ability to take up carbon from the atmosphere and store it, they really play an important role. And so, for example, just in the United States, temperate forests have the ability to offset about 15% of human carbon emissions. They also account for about 10% of terrestrial carbon storage. And so they play a big role in this carbon cycle. And it's something that, in order to understand how they operate, how they're functioning in this uptake and storage, we really need to understand the forests themselves. And that's where somebody like myself as a forest ecologist comes in, and where I'd like to talk about some potential applications of AI. So in order to understand a forest, you have to measure it, you have to study it, you have to understand the processes that are driving the dynamics of that system. And so if we look historically, there are basically two ways for us to study a forest. There's the old school way, the boots on the ground way, where we go into a forest, we have trained experts, and they travel into the forest and they measure it. They identify the trees, they measure how big they are, they look at how they're growing, they look at where they're growing. And this is something that's been going on for over a century. It's the foundation of forestry. And it's a very precise approach, but it is extremely labor intensive. It's extremely inefficient. And you can imagine how much time it takes to start to get into remote areas to study these forests that are really giving us so many ecosystem services. So again, these data are very specific, precise, accurate, and descriptive, but they're just points on the ground. And they really lack a spatial extent that we need. And so I guess one thing I would just throw out at this point is that that could be a first place where there's a potential for AI. You know, what we as humans are doing at a fairly slow pace, is there a way that we could get some sort of artificial intelligence in there to do it in a more effective way? And you can imagine something like drones, which is pretty higher technology, but out there. So another way that forests are generally measured is from above. Think about a plane flying over a forest and taking data about the structure of the forest, taking data about maybe the photosynthesis that's happening. These data are really spatially explicit. And they have, but they're very descriptive. They don't have a lot of mechanism in them. We don't really understand what's going on below that top layer. And so one of the big challenges that we have had is linking those two ends of the spectrum, those boots on the ground specific data with that big, that kind of blanket data that we have. And so there've been a lot of statistical approaches saying, you know, here's the correlation, but the world's really complicated out there. You have a slight change of aspect, you have a slight change in moisture, you have different land use history, and the forests are really functioning in different ways. And those statistical models aren't working very well. They only explain, they don't even get close to explaining 50% of what we see out there. So I see this is another really great potential for using artificial intelligence and getting in there and trying to span those 2 points of the on the ground data to the remotely sensed data, and saying, how can we kind of digest this information and efficiently quantify the forests? So the last couple of things I want to mention is that I've talked about carbon, but forests, as you know, provide a lot more in terms of ecosystem services. They provide biodiversity, they provide wildlife habitat, they work with water quality. And so all of these applications are not just about carbon, but they're about all the services that forests can provide. And then finally, I just want to mention that Penn State owns about 7,000 acres of forested land, the Penn State forest lands that are by Stone Valley, by Shavers Creek. Students, I hope you've had a chance to go out there. We have those data, those on the ground points of data that are collected throughout the forest. And we're actually acquiring different types of remotely sensed data. And so right in our back door, we have this potential to use it as a mesocosm to tackle some of the issues that are happening globally in terms of understanding the role forests can play in sustainability. So with that, I will call it a lightning talk.
Thank you, Margaret. And you're right on 5 minutes. Impressive.
Wow.
Thank you so much. At the end of the lightning talks, we'll have a chance to go back really quick for Q&A. So we'll hold our applause and our questions for then. And we'll move on to our next lightning talk, which is from Yuri Schlachter. Yuri, I don't see you coming up. Hopefully you are on there and able to join in.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hey. So Yuri is Senior Quantitative Scientist with Grow Intelligence. This is Grow Intelligence is not a Penn State organization, but is one of our partners in the Nittany AI Challenge this year, and has a number of different AI tools as well as data sources available for individuals who are interested in working in the spaces that they're exploring. So today Yuri is going to give us a couple of ideas of intersections between the data and resources they have and the possibilities that are available within the challenge. So Yuri?
Thank you. So I'm gonna go over what GROW is and how GROW can help you both in the proposal stage and later in execution stage of your project. And then I'll go over a few ideas that we thought of and would like to work on, but usually don't have resources that we want to identify for you to look at. Can I advance the slides?
Should be able to. 1 second, you should have access now. Oh.
Okay.
There you go.
So yeah, so GROW is a agricultural data and modeling platform. We collect data, normalize it, and make it available to clients, and build our own data, build our own derived data and models. So this is like a big picture representation. We serve data both as a web displays, and it's available through APIs. And for proposal stage, we suggest that you look at GROW web APIs because you'll have full access to all the data, and you can create presentations and explore what kind of data you'd want to use. And at the execution stage, you will give you access to GROW APIs, and will support your work with GROW data. So these are some of the web displays that are available for GROW data. And we have data all over the world, wherever agriculture related data is and environment data is produced. So, so all the data comes as data series identified by item, what it is, metric, what it measures, region, and frequency, how often it's updated. It's available in several forms. We always add the data. So if there's a data you're interested in environment or production or trade, there's a good chance it's in our pipeline and we'd be interested in adding it. Some of the data we work with, like NLP data and satellite data, is not available through the platform, but we wouldn't be able to help you get it, but we'll be able to advise you and point to places to get it. Those are some links that you can explore how to work with our data and look at showcases of best models. And I want to briefly mention two modeling approaches that we use for agriculture, but can be used for a lot of other applications. We have modeling approach called similar regions, which given the environmental data, we would find similar region in the world. We use it for crops. Like if you have a food you want to grow and you want to find alternative place to do it, where would you want to do it? And the kind of sister approach that we just released is called analogous years, which given weather conditions, environmental conditions, has it happened before in which area? So we identified which sustainability goals GROW supports. Zero hunger is our main goal, but I think we can help in a lot of other goals. And in this area of the challenge, we support health and sustainability and climate change areas. So now I'm going to go quickly through ideas that we suggest. So when we work with our data, we typically build models on different levels at country level, state level, county level, and sometimes we go to very specific fields. But we're looking for somebody else to actually try our environmental data and apply it at very specific fields or local data. The previous speaker mentioned the Penn State forest data. That would be really interesting project would be to take that local data and combine it with grow environmental data and basically try to build some machine learning models with that. There are a lot of models that you can build that go beyond simple prediction, but of yields or prediction of agriculture. You can actually make recommendations on how production should be done. And we currently don't do it, but we think it's really interesting area is to, for example, for a lot of agriculture, in a lot of agricultural projects, one can advise better use of fertilizers and use data to prove it, or suggest better planting strategy based on predicted consumption and predicted import or exports. A lot of interesting projects can be done with studying water usage, and two projects we want to highlight is identifying if water is being used efficiently in the region by calculating income water and runoff of the water, and compare how well different regions use water compared to each other. Or one can suggest better use of mixture of crops to be used, because that can improve water balance in the system. When working with those local data, we want to advise that you always have to look at not violating the privacy of the data, because once you go super local, you can actually identify incomes of specific people. And also, like, you have to build your system so proprietary, you don't release proprietary data if you use it. Next set of topics has to do with climate change and weather predictions. There are, I think, 14 or 16 established climate change prediction models, which are well accepted and published. And it would be interesting to see how predicted changes, both in temperature and precipitation, long-term predictions, and higher frequency and catastrophic events would influence weather-related industries like agriculture. On much shorter scale of prediction, there are a lot of new research has been done in doing subseasonal prediction, which is month-long prediction. Those results are available. They're done both with physics simulation and machine learning approaches. One interesting project would be to use those predictions and see if they can improve predictions in agriculture and predict basically shortage of crops way in the future before any events can happen. Kind of a medium scale between those two projects. There are a lot of interesting work being done in using El Nino cycle to predict crops, but that's done at the research level. It would be interesting to build a similar project at scale and do reliable prediction in like 7-year cycle. The same climate data can be used in forest fires prediction, which is a big topic right now. Or one can actually kind of step back and look at how climate change in the last 20 years affected agriculture, and which changes were due to changing conditions and which changes were due to technology changes. The next two areas of suggestions, we can help you with advice, but probably not with data. So we use a lot of satellite data to do predictions and to draw the data. So building new models using both freely available medium resolution data and high resolution data to identify land use, to build crop masking system is a big project being solved right now. So I think it's an interesting area to be involved in. There are a lot of geospatial technology, both new satellites being launched all the time, new software libraries come in and out. A lot of big companies build geospatial systems like Google Earth Engine. I think it would be interesting to try to build pure software project and recommend best of breed in the technology space. There are a lot of interesting projects done with semi-supervised learning. I think they're done by Facebook and Microsoft to build roadmaps from satellite data. I think similar systems can be built with land use and crop masking. And of course, typically with satellite data, one uses real data, but it would be interesting to see if simulation data, like simulation data done with GANs, with generative adversarial networks, would help build solutions. Another big area that we're working in is NLP. And there have been papers published on building NLP models specific for agriculture, but nothing has been released yet. I think this is very interesting area, and there are a lot of data sources available, and it shouldn't be as expensive as training models from scratch using transfer learning. And once you build this system, you can use it as any other natural language system. You can build easy interfaces for data. You can build systems to find alpha signals for news on agriculture, climate change, diseases. Or you can scan, you can basically summarize the data, scan government regulations for climate change related text, for example, or build other types of textual analytics system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Excuse me. One of the things I will point out, which you may not understand yet, but you will understand shortly into the challenge when you get going. Access to data is everything. Probably second only to having the right people on a team. The fact that agrointelligence is able to bring some of that data to the table and provide you some suggestions of solutions that directly align with the data that they have, that's big. So it's one of the things to think about as we're going through here, as you're hearing about some of the challenges, knowing that when it's being recommended to you here, it's very often because there's some data behind it that might be able to support your solution, which we have had a couple teams in the past that had phenomenal ideas, but were never able to get access to the data they needed to support that idea. And that's where things fell apart. And there's only so much you can do there. So the fact that there is an enormous amount of data available helps. Yuri mentioned that they don't have satellite data specifically, but we are partnering with another company you saw on that list called Maxar Technologies. They have terabyte upon terabyte of satellite data all the way down to a 1-inch scale that you can gain access to and be able to use. So if you're going on something that's using satellite imagery, that might be able to significantly help you. Excuse me. So with that, we'll move on to our next lightning speaker. Margaret Okar is Associate Director of Admission Services and Financial Aid at World Campus here at Penn State. And she's going to take a couple minutes to talk to you about some ideas kind of on the education side. Margaret, are you on there?
I'm here, Brett. How does the audio sound?
You sound great. You sound great.
Sounds okay? Okay, super. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, and thanks to the Nittany AI Challenge for having me. I'm excited to share a couple minutes with you. Just a couple quick seconds on some background of my experience so that you know in the future how I might be able to help you and what some of my areas of expertise are. As Brad said, I work at the World Campus, so I have a lot of expertise in online learning. I also have in my career worked quite a bit in the K-12 environment. So if you're considering an elementary, high school, middle school, pre-K sort of solution, I can certainly advise you on that side as well, along with higher ed. I have experience as a faculty member, a staff member, and a student, which you all have too, and I'll encourage you to use that perspective and that lens as you're kind of trying to think about and flesh out your idea. One other thing just to note is that I was part of one of the finalist teams in the 2017 AI Challenge with a project called Transfer Match. So I can also help you as you're going through some of the process with the challenge, if there's any questions that you have in navigating that. I've been through that before, earlier stages of that, but I can certainly help you on that end too. So a few things I've been thinking about related to education and AI, given my background and experience. And I think, like I said, you all as students, I would encourage you to utilize the experience you've had and the problems that you've encountered, or the problems or challenges that friends and family members or classmates of yours have encountered throughout their careers. We all bring different things to our education. And so sometimes those journeys can look very different. And so think through that as you're kind of fleshing out and planning your ideas. A couple of big areas that are things that we in education are thinking about related to AI. Obviously, Brad talked about scale. Scale is always an issue in education. There's usually less staff than is able to help the quantity of students that we have, as you've probably experienced, not just in advising, but in financial aid and admissions even. And as faculty members, sometimes our class sizes can be larger than we would like. And so trying to figure out how the educator side can use AI to help you have a better learning experience and be a successful student is something that I would spend some time thinking about. Personalized learning is a big thing that we're hearing more and more about across the lifespan, whether that's pre-kindergarten, higher ed, or retired age folks. As many of us are living longer, we want to be lifelong learners and stay informed about our communities and learn about new topics. So personalized learning is another area where I think AI has a lot of potential opportunities, so that, you know, if you are in a high school classroom and you are needing more help or are more advanced, you don't necessarily have to sit through the same curriculum as everyone else has. So I think that's a trend that we're going to see more, and having you all work on projects related to how we can use AI to personalize education is something I think we'll see a lot of in the future. Everything, you know, that we do on the back end of your university experience is all about student success. We always are looking to try and find out how can we help our students be more successful. Another area related to that is disability services. We educate students across the board, face-to-face and online, that come to us with a variety of different challenges. And so we've used AI in a couple different ways to help students, again, be successful no matter what they bring to the table as part of their journey. Another couple of questions as I wrap up here that I want to just have you think about is, you know, online learning in particular, but in face-to-face environments too. One of the other things we think a lot about is how can we provide more access to more students around the world so that they can get education, no matter what form that is, whether it's a course, a degree, even access to YouTube sometimes could be an interesting thing. So how could AI help more people get access to education around the world is an interesting question I would encourage you to consider. How could AI help in classrooms to improve learning, both in a face-to-face environment, whether that's a lecture or elementary school classroom, or in the online environment? As you know, those are two very different things, and the way those courses are structured can be quite different. So where could AI potentially fit in there to help classrooms and learning as part of their outcomes? And then I mentioned this a little bit, but thinking about both the student experience, but also think about how you might create something that could help staff and faculty create tools that can better help them do their jobs so that they can spend more time with you all, sharing their expertise and guiding you through your courses and your classes and your degrees. So I'm happy to help you however I can. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. And I just thank you for being here, and thanks, Brad, for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Margaret mentioned it, but I'll reiterate. she's been through this. She's been sitting in the seat that you're sitting in right now and went through the challenge 2 years ago, made it all the way to the finals. So she has a very, not just being a subject matter expert, but also kind of an expert on the process and the challenges you'll face. She is an invaluable resource and just a really good person as well. So if education is an area that you're thinking about, focusing on it within the challenge, she is a phenomenal resource. And there are other individuals I can connect you up with as well. Excuse me. Our next lightning talk presenter is Nelson Roque. Nelson is a postdoctoral fellow with the Center for Healthy and Aging here at Penn State University, and is going to talk to you a little bit about the areas that he's working in right now and some of the possibilities, particularly as Margaret had mentioned, our aging population, given the fact that we are living longer and the challenges, particularly with brain-related diseases and dementia that are related to that. So Nelson.
Brad, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with everyone today. So as was mentioned, sorry, there we go. My research is related to leveraging pervasive technologies, things like cell phones, things like existing data sources to understand cognitive aging, particularly in context. Cognition is not something that happens in a vacuum. Ideally, there's a lot of factors that are influencing cognition, so it's important to understand them all. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag here on the transitions.
You should have access now.
Right.
Perhaps use your space bar or arrow keys.
No, sorry, I'm not
Okay.
good.
All right, I'll advance for you then.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Brad.
Yep.
So generally, the idea is that without pathology, cognitive aging allows us to reach a very old age while still being able to live independently. And I guess one of the problems and one of the needs for AI is to understand how perhaps we might understand those that might have a different trajectory. Brad, if we can advance. So those, for example, with neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's. And ideally, we want to understand that trajectory change. Continue. Sorry. And this is an important problem. By 2050, there's projected to be around 150 million people to have dementia. And this is quite an amount of people that are going to need care, relating back to the UN goal number 3 of good health and well-being. And globally, that means that about 10 million people every year are going to need to be screened for dementia. And that's a huge burden. So in a lot of ways, AI can come in here to help reduce burden on the healthcare system and more broadly, perhaps use existing pervasive technologies to serve as some collaborative role with physicians. So in our case, we use mobile technologies, mobile phones to monitor disease progression. And in terms of cognition, this idea that when evaluating cognition, we need to understand it in the context of daily life. So cognition is related to our biological system. So as quick examples are genetics and our inflammation, but it's also related to our physical environment. So relating to earlier points, cognition is impacted by things like climate. It's also impacted by pollution, and we're doing some of that work right now. But cognition is also situated in this social environment where we need to also understand culture and social relationships and social status and what roles we might assume in our workplace in evaluating cognition to have a better understanding of someone's trajectory. Now, to do this, we use a multitude of technologies, primarily cognitive assessments using mobile phones, but we also use web-based tools, we use simulation, we also use all sorts of surveys, sensors that generate dense, rich data streams. And lastly, we tie this in with existing data sources from examples such as the United States Census Bureau, but also sources such as Google Takeout and Google Maps. So just leveraging and bringing all this data together. And this is all towards the goal to understand the relationship between all of these other measures with our diagnosis of dementia. So to what extent are the measures that are coming from mobile phones or, for example, blood-based biomarkers or even MRIs, to what extent are they related to each other and ultimately related to this gold standard of clinic measures? because, relating back to the idea of burden, right now dementia is diagnosed with a suite of somewhere between 1 and 2 hours of time, in addition to all sorts of case conferencing by the physicians themselves. So ultimately, for one person to be diagnosed, this could be a multi-hour process. So right now, one of the challenges with the AI is being able to mine this existing data to be able to understand what data sources are the most important and try to collect those on larger amounts of people so that we can make a greater impact. Now, in terms of the opportunities that are available, I'm going to talk to you about a couple projects that I'm directly involved in, and I can help in terms of shuttling you through the process of getting access to this data, which would require writing a brief concept proposal. But generally speaking, I work with a group at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, where we work with a relatively diverse and older adult sample. And we use mobile technologies to measure people, in this case, over 14 days, and looking at things like their cognitive performance, looking at things like their stress levels and their social relationships. And for some of these people, we also have MRI data. So it's a matter of understanding how these measures relate to each other, but also which of these measures is most sensitive and predicting those that are going to have later stages of dementia, which in our sample is about 20 to 30% of our sample. And related, we're also part of this collaborative research effort called the National Institute of Health All of Us Research Program, where, in the study that I described right now is in a set of 250 people and eventually 600 people, but the All of Us Research Program is doing this with 1 million people. So the idea is that these same data streams and insights that we're trying to gather in terms of how these data sets are related are going to be directly applicable at scale very soon here. And related to some work by partners on the Nittany AI Alliance is this idea that an offshoot company from Alphabet, a Google company, Verily, is working on this similar project, Project Baseline, where they're also interested in engaging the community and understanding cognition and other health aspects over a long period of time. So this is just one of the other data sets that through collaboration might just be available, and also might be an opportunity to apply insights from our work and our data sets, maybe at a smaller scale, to bigger problems relatively soon. So thank you very much, and I encourage any of you to reach out to me. And in terms of kind of preparing some of these AI tools, one tool that I've put together since I've been a postdoc here at Penn State is to extract features from time series data. So to whatever extent that's helpful, it's freely available on my GitHub.
Thank you so much. Health is one of those areas where, excuse me, health is one of those areas where, going back to data, available data, we'll have some challenges to it. There is public health data available that you can get to relatively freely and easily, but Nelson, the Center for Healthy Aging, can provide potentially access to information data that you would not otherwise be able to get to. We can also work through our partners at Google to see about additional data sets that they might have available and getting those in the format and able to function the way that you want them to. So those are all things that we can help you with. So our next lightning talk speaker is actually here in the room with us, if you're good. John Gershenson is Director for Humanitarian Engineering and Social Entrepreneurship program here at Penn State, colloquially referred to as HESE. John is going to be able to come and talk to us about some of the issues on the humanitarian side, and very importantly, be here after the lightning talks to be able to talk with you and help you out a little bit as well.
Is this gonna work? It's cord.
Yes. So, HDMI.
Perfect.
And that should be able to go there, and I should be able to click on that. And if the world is working for us, it should show your screen. Up top right.
Maybe I went too fast. Just get any screen.
Yeah. It happened to me yesterday. Oh, looks like something happened on your local. So Let me do a switch back and forth and see. View those up. That's ours. Oh no,
That was exciting though.
it was. How about?
I can fake it without slides and send them out after.
Yeah, we will be sharing the slides with everyone afterwards. So all of the links, the documents and the like should be able to come up. Now I'm set at laptop as input. I'm set at laptop on the screen. And they're set up.
It's definitely clicking
It's
on my
doing
side,
something,
so
yeah.
it's somewhere in this process. For time, let's just kind of shoot through. Okay.
Yeah. Nope.
I'm fine.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm John Gershenson. I'm from the HESE program. How many people have heard the HESE program before? Wow, okay, that's awesome. So humanitarian engineering, social entrepreneurship. Those are kind of the two pieces where we combine those two. So we really looked within the program for how do we find products and services that are really human-centered, that have a significant impact on people and their lives. Specifically, while I think most of what you heard right here is a little bit more in your own backyard, what we're looking for are things that relate to international development. So things all around the world. As a program, we happen to have a specific expertise in East Africa as an application space, as do a lot of other people on campus, which is really fantastic. So this idea of human-centered products and services, and then as well finding something that has some sustainable end to it, so that you all are not just working on something where, hey, we're going to do this thing, and we're going to create this technology, and that's really cool, and then we're going to collect some money, and then we're going to walk off. But instead, it's got a sustainable end to it. So there's a way to scale it. There's a way that it actually has impact on people. And that's where the social entrepreneurship element comes into play. What is the ecosystem that what you do plays in? And how can we as a program help you all grow that as much as possible? So let's see. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I did have my really good looking slides. But so first of all, I'm going to give you my 2 cents on things that I think are pretty fun to work in that might be relevant to you. And then the other is I'm going to give you some links which they'll have to other organizations that I think are really, really relevant for you all to check out if you're going to do anything in this international development sort of space. Okay, so so some things that that are my 2 cents about space that's really good to work in international development. So the first is collecting massive amounts of data. Okay, so most of the data that a lot of models are running on right now is not data that is localized to where the algorithms actually need to run. So what we need to do is collect a lot more data in these places where we want our algorithms to be run. So in order to do that, it's pretty awesome time right now. Whether it's IoT and just in general, sensors are getting so cheap and so small. You can embed sensors in almost anything. So for instance, we were talking, one of our groups that's working on a project now where they're in e-agriculture products. The idea is to take manual agricultural products that are already out there and then power, because we're integrating with this system of kiosks that can recharge batteries. We're going to take these batteries and put them and somehow attach them to what used to be manual products, and now you're going to be so much more productive. That's awesome and everything. And then they're going to be able to exchange batteries. It's cheap, phenomenal. But in doing so, what we're saying is like that's great. And you don't like 4x production or maybe even 10x production. That would be great. But let's look at the wider possibilities. So now that I have a product that used to be manual that now actually has power running to it, what else can I do? I can run sensors. I can link it to other products all over the world. So I gave them the one example just to kind of set them running in. Even if I just had a shovel that had power to it, so somehow we turn it into a power shovel. But now, and it's not just a regular old shovel, but if you think of the hole that you have to dig in order to put a seedling or a sapling into the ground in order for it to then grow. So every time I used the machine to dig that little hole to put the sapling in, it was actually sampling the ground, sampling the soil at the exact same time. Now, something that was really impossible before, which is really localized sampling of the soil all over the place, is as easy as just keep renting out these shovels as much as you possibly could. And then all of a sudden you collected massive amounts of data. So massive amounts of data on the state of things, on weather, on agriculture, basically the who, what, where, when, how of people's lives in order to collect data and then improve upon what they're doing. Then taking broader data that exists around the world and sharing it to make more equitable markets. Okay, so people who have less access to information are definitely being hampered in their trading in any sorts of markets. Whether these are markets for money, whether these are markets for power within government, they're all kind of the same. So how do we get more information to more people locally? So therefore we have open commerce, open government, and the localization of education, I think, is another one that's really interesting. So what is the right education for you in your place that will help you get one step further than you are right now? As opposed to, hey, everybody should learn Python. Okay, that's fantastic, but if I live in Homa Bay, Kenya, learning Python is really not, may not really be that breakout technology that I should be learning first, okay? So yes, we've got collecting massive data, we've got sharing broader data, and then there is decision-making experts for greater impacts. So how can we help people make better decisions? Again, agriculture, energy usage, hyper-localization. So right now there's a lot of these broader apps that you all are using that help you make decisions, like finding an Uber or whatever it might be. But how do we do hyper-localization of these things that help people exactly where they're standing? So basically, I kind of view it, because it helps me in my head, is the Waze of things, right? The Waze is awesome because it is just hyper local wherever you are, because it gets lots of people on. And we'll come back to Waze in a second. The one thing you shouldn't do is payments and money. It's done. Payments and money are done. Everybody's really good at it. My phone works better in rural Western Kenya than it does here in State College, Pennsylvania. I have more access to more apps that do cooler things. I have literally bought a mango on a rural street corner in the middle of nowhere when I was completely out of money from a person, one mango, about 15 cents, from a person who had no, just to describe the person so you get a picture, the person had no shoes. He was selling a total of 6 mangoes that day. That was his entire work of the day. And we did the entire exchange over mobile money in the middle of nowhere because it was the easiest way to do it, and it was no problem. So no more payment stuff. So some things that we are working on within our HESE program that might spur some interest, where we would definitely have people who are going to collaborate with you. And to tell you the truth, some of these may end up in this competition anyway. So if you want to join the people who are already doing it, that would be awesome. So if I want to drill a well, where on a piece of property should I start drilling that well where I have the greatest chance for hitting water? There's lots of great resources out there, and all we need to do is some sort of a better machine learning in order to put them all together. The missing a drill, so missing where you drill for water, is a really expensive fail. Okay? That's a couple $100 fail if you do it in the wrong place. The Wazing, do other people use that as a term, or am I the only one? Okay, the Wazing of local insecurity. I'm walking down the street in a place that has a lot of hotspots, okay? That is political insecurity, fighting of different sorts. Should I walk to the left? Should I walk to the right down the street? What's going on right around me? The information sources that I have available to me via social media are absolutely horrible, okay? Finding the truth on those, especially local truths, is really, really, really difficult, okay? But if we can have multiple people all on this, and I can say like, okay, so you just said something happened here, okay, and we're close to each other, these two are really close to you, they concur with you, therefore it must be true, because both of them previously have told truth in the past, okay? But you now say something, and wow, you have not told truth in the past, and I'm over here, and I'm really close to you, and I don't see the same reality, because I'm not, and therefore now we don't trust you. How do we raise that sort of political insecurity information? I think that's interesting. How to identify a good batch of produce on a truck from a single photo. Do I want to buy the produce on that truck? Do I not want to buy the produce on that truck? I don't want to travel a day and a half to figure that out, okay? I want you to send me a picture, and based upon the picture, somehow I'm going to know whether or not that entire truckload is going to spoil in a half a day or a day and a half. Let's see. Okay, that's the last one. So 50breakthroughs.org. I'm going to send you, actually, forget that. We'll just, oh, you can't see any of these. I'm going to send you links. But 50breakthroughs.org, great place to start. It is the 50 coolest things that if they technology-based things, that if they happened, they would significantly change the world. 50breakthroughs.org. And as I looked through them, I saw about 30 of the 50 that could benefit from this AI challenge, if not more. And that's only my small mind, you know, like you all are going to say like, wow, how did you miss this other one? Like, it was so cool. That's a great place. That's a great place to look at. Some other places, there is ICT4D right here on campus. ICT4D is a program through the Communications College right here on campus, where they're doing a lot of ICT work for development. That's the 4D. I think they're a great group to work with. There's no one here from Plant Village.
No,
okay.
not today.
Plantvillage.org, another thing that's based out of here on campus, another agricultural-based one. Absolutely fantastic organization. Phenomenal data sets, completely open for all of you to use. They've already got an API, a lot of people working on it. Really a groundbreaking organization in terms of understanding healthy agriculture, where to produce, how much to produce, what good plants look like, what bad plants look like. A great place to work, go through. I'm going to link to a great article from USAID, the US, that's basically how the United States gives aid money to other countries and aid in kind as well. And there's a great article for how to use AI and how not to use AI in those circumstances. And I think I've got a couple links for that as well. And as part of that, see, this slide looks so good. Okay, so so everybody and their mother is trying to use AI in international development right now. So there's IoT blank, like everybody's doing an IoT project, everybody's doing a machine learning project. Just like, so when I'm in Kenya, it is so easy to find people who are all doing this. Just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it, okay? I think this is really, really important. So a couple things to keep in mind as you go through this. Consider whether or not an AI solution actually is the appropriate solution for the stakeholders. Yes, it would be cool to do it that way, okay? But is it the appropriate solution for the stakeholders? So in other words, you have to involve people in your work, okay? I don't think you are going to be successful at all in this AI challenge if you don't have a really solid connection to who your stakeholders are, who the customers are, who the people that are impacted by what you do. If you haven't spent a lot of time talking to them, probably don't have much chance for success. We always say in our program, you can't possibly launch a company if you haven't spoken to 1,000 customers. That's pretty good. And similarly, in our program in HESE, as we develop products and services, it is required that every group meets with a minimum of 10 customers per week. That's 150 over the course of the semester. Let's see, stakeholders. Open data. So I love that AI solves problems, okay? And I get that in order to make money and move forward, you have to own something, right? And the one thing that you shouldn't own, in my opinion, is the data. You should own the application, what you build on top of the data. but you shouldn't prevent other people from having access to knowledge. But it's okay to charge people for your massaging of that knowledge and for the things that you do on top of it if it's necessary for sustainability. But please don't try to collect data and own the data and prevent access to the data from people who really need it to have a better life. Something to think about as you go on. That being said, privacy and security need to be built in. So don't assume because you're working in a place that is a lot more casual or is a lot poorer that these same people don't deserve the same privacy and security that people who own the latest phones would also want. What else? Were there any others that I wanted to say? Yeah, so data. So it is so easy and so cheap to get data from millions on millions of people right now. So I really strongly encourage you to do it in a way that has significant impact on not only the sustainable development goals, but the people who can benefit from it most. So if you want to get a hold of me, I'm pretty easy. I'm going to be here afterwards, but also Gersh, G-E-R-S-H, at psu.edu, or HESE, H-E-S-E, at psu.edu. Either one will get a hold of me. I'm going to send Brad the link to everything, and we can work from there. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely phenomenal, and quite honestly, I got some ideas out of that and a couple resources that I was not familiar with. So that was tremendous. I will second and yes, yeah, that's next one. Yeah, it looks like we're giving somebody's passport. I will second and third the idea. Excuse me, about making certain that you do not do something because it's neat. And I said in the very beginning about starting with why. Think about that thing that is going to make a difference and that you're passionate about, and then go from there. And if you have that, and this is something we can do today as soon as we're done with the lightning talks. If you have that thing, if you've got that thing, you said, this is what I'm passionate about. I don't know how AI fits. That's where we can help. We can help you think about where AI fits in that. Let's start with the why first, and then we'll figure out the technology on top of it, okay? So our next lightning talk speaker is Matthew Ferrari, who's Associate Professor of Biology with the Center for Infectious Disease Dynamics here at Penn State University. And Matt is going to talk to us about some of his ideas of the best opportunities for using AI in his field. So Matt, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Excellent. You sound great.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk. Just a brief introduction. So I'm a professor of biology. My training is in statistics and in ecology. And I spend most of my time working on the population dynamics of infectious diseases, and particularly vaccine preventable diseases, diseases that affect young children, diseases that worldwide can result in huge impact in terms of loss of life, but also in terms of illness and time away from work and huge economic costs. And particularly the disease that I spent a lot of my time thinking about is a disease called measles. It's caused by a virus that used to be super prevalent in much of the world and has been dramatically reduced through the introduction of a vaccine in the mid-1960s. Now, around the world, this is still a pretty dramatic public health concern. There's between 7 and 10 million cases of measles around the world currently, and it probably results in somewhere between 200 and 400 childhood deaths every day around the world. That's largely focused in low and middle income countries that both have a hard time at the national scale of implementing vaccination programs, but oftentimes there's enormous heterogeneity even within countries. And really what happens is that measles becomes very much a disease of poverty and access. So people that the people that have the poorest access to health care, preventative care through vaccination, and then health services. So palliative care and treatment of illness tend to both have highest risk for getting measles and have the poorest outcomes if they get infected. They're much more likely to die, right? So from a day-to-day process, day-to-day perspective, I work with a lot of big international health organizations on 3 primary goals: estimating the burden of measles, so how much of it is happening around the world. That's really important in terms of prioritizing goals and where to allocate health resources. Using trends over time to try and evaluate public health interventions. So when we spend money, when we invest in vaccination, are we achieving the goals that we think we are? And we need to use time series data and the spatial distribution of this infection to help us evaluate whether or not things are doing what we expect, right? And then we develop prospective simulation models to help evaluate candidate interventions and investments from all of these health organizations, right? So really, these are investment. You can think of them like investment companies. They're putting money into health, and they really want to put their money into places where they're going to achieve the most good for each of their dollars, right? So that's the background of what I do. But actually, what I wanted to talk about here, where I think there's really a big need and a real big challenge, is in the humanitarian crisis. So outbreaks of infectious diseases and outbreaks of measles in particular can be enormously devastating in these communities. Currently, there's a large outbreak of measles in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now that's infected over 300,000 children across the country and resulted in more than 6,000 deaths among children under 5 in the last 12 months. And this is an entirely preventable problem. And I have spent the last 10 or 15 years now working with an organization called Médecins Sans Frontières, which is the card you can see on the screen. The English translation for that is Doctors Without Borders. And they're a medical crisis intervention organization. The philosophy of this group is that since humanitarian crises, things like conflict, natural disasters, and epidemics, don't respect natural borders or national borders, then neither should the humanitarian response. And I specifically work on the humanitarian response to outbreaks. And what this amounts to is a big optimization problem to determine what to do where. And oftentimes these responses involve a broad combination of different kinds of interventions, some combination of education, sanitation, vaccination, and treatment of those that are already sick. And this becomes a big and challenging allocation problem. Where do we go? Where don't we go? Where do we go first? Where do we send the truck that has the vaccines, and where do we send the truck that has the doctors, right? And since an outbreak is a dynamic and changing phenomenon, both in time and space, we need to balance the direct response in places and populations that are currently affected by the crisis and the preventative response in the places and the populations where the outbreak hasn't yet reached. So we've got to do some activity in the places that are currently experiencing the problem, but we also want to allocate resources to places where the outbreak may get to in the future and stop its spread, right? But here's the rub. Any individual response is fundamentally constrained by what resources can feasibly be deployed, and the opportunity cost of over-responding, really spreading yourself too thin and thereby diluting the impact of this response that you might have everywhere. If you add to that the fact that every outbreak is different, then you need to predicate or justify every decision you make with the often limited data sources that are available or coming in through various official and unofficial official or unofficial avenues, right? So we talk about, in many of these cases, big data and big background public health data and all these massive data sources that are available. But a crisis is really a change in state. And so oftentimes that background data isn't particularly useful in the moment. And what we have to do is aggregate and analyze very rapidly, very short-term and real-time data in the moment to be able to respond to these critical and acute crises as they happen. So what we do is we work on strategies to identify the optimal deployment of logistically constrained resources to mitigate the impact of these outbreaks. And really what we're trying to do is replace the sort of political borders that are often limiting to these responses with evidence-based conceptual boundaries on the response efforts. So what would this mean in practical terms? What are the kinds of products and tools that we would need? Really, things like natural language processing for taking in, cleaning, processing, geolocating, all of these various, oftentimes unstructured data sources that weren't designed to be put into a workflow, but become critical in the moment. Things like news reports or paper-based health records or unstructured electronic databases that health systems hadn't planned to incorporate into a big analysis architecture, right? We need to rapidly spin those up, get them into a form that we can both understand and share and analyze, to be able to identify the extent of an outbreak and where the most critical touch points are for interventions. Things like risk mapping, going back and looking at historical problems or historical outbreaks and identifying where crises have been in the past. What are the variables that correlate with outbreak spread or outbreak severity, and use that to help us allocate responses and resources in the moment, right? One of the other great things is that if we do those kinds of retrospective analysis, we can also then figure out where to allocate data gathering. And I think that's a really important point here, is that oftentimes we think about relying on data that has already been collected passively, right? But really, in many of these cases, we need active data collection. And the important question then becomes is, where's the most important place to go and collect data? Oftentimes in the kind of work we do with MSF is sending out teams to do explorations, identify what the situation on the ground is, because we first have to have that sort of human intelligence telling us, yes, we think the outbreak is there, we've sent somebody out and we've identified it, now we're gonna send the team out, right? And so actually identifying where to gather data is a really big and challenging problem, right? And again, then trying to integrate all these data streams to do general kinds of forecasting, right? Where is it going to be going? Where's it going to be going next? How fast? How bad might it be, right? And then lastly, simulation of what the candidate interventions might be, and trying to use the outcome of those simulations to structure the decisions and try and allocate resources between, putting vaccination here versus sending out teams to treat cases or what have you, right? So really trying to address those simulation and allocation problems. So anyway, that's the, I think, very often, these are very sort of acute and operational problems, oftentimes dealing with sort of small to mid-sized data. But I think there's a real opportunity to use, whether you want to call it AI or at least just quantitative intuition, to try and help operationalize some of this decision-making and indeed make the decision-making more transparent and repeatable and rapid. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much for giving that kind of on-the-ground perspective of things that you've seen that would help. And I think you brought it home as far as the potential impact that could be had there. When you're talking about the number of lives lost for individuals that could be addressed by the development of some tools that could be used and that could be generated here in the room, that your work could be directly linked to those lives being saved. It's the importance of the work that you've got here and what you could potentially do. And I'll go back to the very beginning where I was talking about when you say, that's not me, I could never do that. One of our past participants in this challenge ends a video that we have by saying, in the end of the challenge, I realized the only one standing between me and doing this amazing thing was me. So you're here and you're hearing these opportunities and these possibilities right now, and you could be the one that creates that solution. So we are actually going to, our next speaker is Armin Kamanian, Associate Professor of Production Systems and Modeling here at Penn State University. Armin?
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
There you are.
Are you sharing the screen with me now, or?
Yes, you should have access now.
Okay, let's see.
There you go.
What are you seeing now?
We see your title. If you click either your spacebar or your arrow, you should be able to advance slides.
So can you see the slides now?
Not at the moment. Do you have them up locally?
Yes, you should share the screen with me here, right? Yeah.
Okay, if you click on share and share your screen, you should be able to.
Oh yeah, that's right. I should do it. So let me remember where I do that.
Down at the bottom of the screen, there should be a button that says share.
Down at the bottom of the screen. Actually, there isn't. You know, actually, there isn't one. I can see it actually. But it can be me. I have used Zoom more or less 1 million times. And I don't see the sharing option here on my, that's weird.
Hmm.
Let's see. Now I see you all. Aha, got it.
Got it?
Got it.
Okay.
Got it. There are so many stuff there. Yeah. Show all windows. Finally, got it.
Got it?
So, do you have it there?
We can see you now.
All right. We'll try to move quickly. This one, and get this out of the way. There. All right. Yeah. Thanks for the short. So, quick introduction. My name is Armin Kemanian. Just in case you need to spell it correctly in the schedule, there is an H there that shouldn't be there. But my name is very easy to find. I cannot hide with this name. I work in agriculture. I am an original agronomist turned into an engineer. And among the things that I do is modeling and use of machine learning. And, now it's a bit mixed up with artificial intelligence, but they meld into each other. So I'll give you quickly a few examples of things that are used in agriculture, in which artificial intelligence is used in agriculture or can be used. And hopefully, trigger your interest in the matter. So here is a quick example. For example, when agronomists need to visit a field and scouting and make a decision, there is some time that goes into it. The use of unmanned aerial vehicles makes it a little easier now. The problem is, of course, that when you take images from there, you need to read them, put them in a server that needs to be able to understand the information that is seen, deliver a pattern, tell the scientist or the operator or the farm operator what kind of options they have. So the advantage here is that compared with the old system in which a person should drive, scout the field on foot or driving, or even with a drone, an automatic system lets it collect the image and quickly decide what it is seeing, right? Are systems perfect today? Of course they aren't. They aren't. But don't believe people that says that, the reality of applying these tools is far away. It's around the corner, and it will be better and better, because there is one thing that comes with these new tools is that the systems are perpetually improving. And so this is an area where things will get better. So what is a potential example? Well, here it is one when one way of controlling weeds in agriculture is spraying them with herbicides, right? And herbicides get a little bad press, but sometimes they are needed. But we can improve, and we are improving a lot on where to apply and how. For example, a herbicide doesn't need to spray over the entire field. It needs to be sprayed really on the weed, and sometimes just on one spot on the weed. And now there are systems that can detect a weed in a leaf and detect the exact herbicide into the exact leaf, right? And not only that, later, well, there are improvements of that, right? The environment improves, the economics improve. There is technology associated with it, technology associated with sometimes with value, and a much better monitoring. For example, imagine that an unmanned vehicle, a drone or a UAV, flew over a place, then a tractor went over, sprayed a weed, we can come back to the very same spot the next day and the next day and the next day for very little money and detect if the control is working. And if it isn't, we may have an early warning that there is herbicide resistance. So the applications are massive in this regard, right? And this is not science fiction, right? This is in the works. So that's a long-term kind of tactical decisions. What other things can we do in the short term? Well, this is a map of parts of the US. At the very north in the top, what you're seeing is Minnesota and the Dakotas. The very south is the Gulf. And the colors that you see there to your left is an artificial intelligence derived model of what were the optimum areas for growing corn, right? The dark color shows the band to the left that was optimum in 2016. And to the right, the really narrow band of dark color is the optimum in 2012. 2012 happens to be very close to what climate models predict the future will bring. And so we can predict where corn can be grown actually in optimum conditions in the future. I have the maps for that. I think I know when in 2030, 2050, 2070 will be the best areas in the US to grow corn. All I can tell you now is that they aren't the ones that we have today. So they are moving. So in terms of real estate value for agriculture or expected development on infrastructure, all this information matters. Where does it all come from? Around 32,000 observations of corn yield per county since 1958. I think when USDA started collecting this information, they didn't plan that somebody else in the future will use it to do this type of use of the data. That's where we are at, right? This can be applied. Would you apply this for other crops as well? And there are other tools. So this is you can see a link there, which is live, that says it's called the model cycles. This is a simulation model that can run any agricultural system anywhere, and that is ready for all of Pennsylvania. And we have already laid out all the crop rotations, every crop that happened in every field of Pennsylvania since 2010 until now. And a user can register, and by just registering the system and using it, we'll get access to the climate for a given location, the daily climate, the soils that are there, and of course, the missing piece is what were the management practices, but at least we know which crops were there. So you can only imagine the number of applications that can emerge from this. You know, other speakers alluded to this. I hope I give you an idea of what to combine there. So, you know, essentially, artificial intelligence will let us do more. So artificial intelligence, I really don't like the term artificial, but I don't like it. I mean, I find it a little bit humorous. It's essentially there are partial versions of our own brain, right? The difference perhaps is that the ethics is not so much embedded in the artificial intelligence systems. You know, we have to keep in mind that ethics matters a lot. But what artificial intelligence systems let us do is learn more, learn faster, but at about fewer things. But then things will keep evolving. I think some of the examples that even Zach presented were extremely illustrative of where we are at, right? We can create fake images that look like people doing things, right? And the same applies for other fields. One of the advantages is that these systems improve and improve and improve forever. For example, let's imagine the way we do agricultural experiments now. You know, you plant a crop, we do a set of practices to see how it responds, and then you get an outcome, right? And then you judge based on the outcome what to do. Well, with a simulation model, we can run 1 million experiments many times and start learning from the outcome, you know, more than what we get from one realization. And those are huge differences that we are just started tapping into. And I think with that, I will leave it there for the session in which you can ask me questions. All I would like to say is here is my contact information. You know, I work here in part to work for you guys, students. And the one thing that I would like to mention is that we are just at the surface of what artificial intelligence can do in our field. It will not replace us, but it will make us think differently for sure. I think that's all I have to say, Zach.
Thank you so much. And you might be beginning to see some overlap between some of our presentations, and you can imagine what we just talked about with what Grow Intelligence was talking about earlier on, and some of the overlap between need and particularly data sets. So there might be some really interesting things if you start bringing together the recommendations between them. Excuse me. So our next presenter is actually one you already heard from at the very beginning. Megan Hoskins is going to give us another dive very quickly into specific examples that she has for ideas for you before we wrap things up with our final presenter. So Megan, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you still hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay, great. The wind has picked up outside and there's ice hitting my window, so hopefully you can't hear that very well. All right, so I wanted to just touch on things that we've been thinking about. Can I have screen? There we go. Okay. So I wanted to talk about transportation systems, but before I kind of dive into this, I also want to make sure that everybody knows that if you are interested in clean power type applications, we do have quite a bit of data on that as well. We do have 2 wind turbines on campus and they are used for research. We have a faculty member who works with those. We also have 3 now solar energy facilities that are generating data. We have a small one by the OPP building. We have a larger one by the hospital. And then we have a 3rd one that's going in Franklin County in Pennsylvania, which is near our Mont Alto campus. All 3 of those are generating data that you can get access to. Actually, the OPP one has a web dashboard that anybody can go to. And the 3rd one, the largest one, has multiple inverters, and their first site is actually active now. So we'll be getting access to that data here probably next month. So just want to make sure that everyone knows that data is available on those things as well. So for smarter transportation systems, I'm sure everyone has been watching that autonomous electric vehicles are coming, and that should be a wonderful thing, hopefully. But what is going on with our transportation systems now, and are there ways that we can improve on some of these transportation systems before we get all these fantastic carbon neutral transportation systems in the future? Transportation in the US accounts for almost 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a pretty large sector when we think about greenhouse gas emissions. So thinking about locally again, what kind of data or information is available, the transportation systems we have here, we have a local airport, we have a local bus system. I didn't put the train system. We don't have a very big one here, but in Pennsylvania we do have trains as well. And then there are starting to be other options like the bike share and the ride share programs that Penn State is starting to offer. But there's also things like personal vehicles, the Uber, Lyft type modes of transportation, and delivery vehicles of all different kinds. So how can we look at changing these? So data that I could think of that could be available, some of these I know for sure are available, and some of them I'm not so sure. So like local traffic signal data. I don't know if that's something that we could get access to, but I would certainly ask. Deliveries to dorms. I've been hearing that with Amazon being so prevalent now, actually there's a lot of delivery vehicles going around, and there's a lot of boxes coming to the dorms. So if anything that goes through the front desk, we likely have data for. Purchasing across the university, there's a lot of people who work at this university, and they're spread out and they don't necessarily all talk to each other. So when they're purchasing things like office supplies, janitorial supplies, furniture, even laboratory supplies, thinking about like cylinder gas or Petri dishes or things like that, around our campus and other campuses that are buying similar things, but they probably don't know it. So thinking about how we can get access to that data, we do have a central purchasing office that sees all of that data, but they don't have necessarily the time or the expertise to sift through all of it. And they could certainly use the help. Also, the labor to purchase things locally. So we pay our own janitorial staff and a lot of our own maintenance staff. People who need to fix something, if they have to run out to Home Depot or Lowe's, we have the information that they went and did that, but are there ways to change how that's done? Thinking about bus ridership, are there ways to do that better? We know where where people have parking permits, we do know where they live. It's not information that we can share with, this is that personal data. When you combine information together, it becomes sensitive. But if you remove the person from the address, or maybe make an address more like a town or something instead of a specific home, then that could be data that could be useful. We also have ridership data on how our bike share gets used, and it gets used quite a bit. The other data that I just want to point out is whatever your device collects about you. So now in the days of the Apple Watch and the health monitoring and the social media, all of those things are getting collected on your phone. Thinking about what gets collected and how that information could be used together to maybe suggest things is another source of data. So thinking about how we can use that infrastructure to optimize, perhaps. This is something that our purchasing office is definitely thinking about with people either locally through Penn State General Stores or local stores, as well as through national chains like Amazon, and then even thinking about meal deliveries from like Grubhub. Are there ways we can combine or optimize? If trucks are coming to campus, can we fill them up in both directions so that when we're purchasing things, we have a full truck coming in, and then maybe it also loads up and with returns and sends it back out. So how can we help the logistics to consolidate and optimize things around campus? Or are there ways that we can encourage more sustainable transportation options? So thinking about personalized type messaging. So like I was saying, if your data is collecting, or your device is collecting all this data about you, are there ways that it can maybe suggest something like, hey, instead of driving today, there was an accident on such and such, it might be better to take the bus or ride your bike. And maybe even, is it looking at your food purchases? You had Taco Bell delivered every night this week, but there's tacos offered in Redifer tonight, so maybe you should go over there instead. Kind of a silly one, but also, just getting people to think maybe in different ways. And then also thinking about maybe larger audience. So like at a bus stop, could there be something specific to that bus stop? Like the loop is late, but you could walk. And it would take you this much time. Maybe getting people to think about it's not actually that far of a walk between some points. So if it'll only take you 5 minutes to walk there, then maybe you don't need to wait for the loop today. Things like that. And all of that to think about, how can we reduce transportation related impacts on the environment. So if we have fewer vehicles on and around campus, we could reduce our local greenhouse gas emissions. Both reduces the climate related impacts, but also helps the breathability of our air and our health. And some of those delivery trucks are possibly diesel vehicles, and those are also putting out particulate matter that's not good for us either. There's also benefits like reducing traffic around, which reduces the likelihood of collisions between people and vehicles. Also decreasing the noise on campus, making it a little friendlier. And hopefully increasing more healthy activity of people to walk around, bike around, things like that. So I wanted to point out on the right-hand side that This is the greenhouse gas emissions profile of the university. The university has worked very hard to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions footprint over the last 10, 15 years. But some of the remaining parts of our greenhouse gas emissions are things that are going to need more people to be involved with. So anything we can do, if there are ideas you guys have on how to use AI to help people become part of that solution, I think that would be fantastic. That's all I have.
Thank you so much, Megan. And we'll get back to possibility for some questions in a second. But right now, we've got our last speaker. Excuse me. Andrew Gutberlet is Manager of Engineering Services here at the Office of Physical Plant, OPP, here at Penn State University, and has access and information and insights about the massive amounts of data that are collected across the university. So, Andrew?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Brad?
Yep, you sound good.
All right, great. And then advancing the slides, how do I do that? Page down.
You should have access. You should be able to either click on the screen or spacebar. Sorry, you should have access right now. You should be able to click on your screen on the slide to advance, or to hit spacebar, or any of the like. There you go.
There we go. Okay, good. So, the idea, we work pretty extensively with the Sustainability Institute. So my name is Andrew Gutberlet. I work as a Manager of Engineering Services at Penn State's Office of Physical Plant. And we take care of buildings across not just University Park, but every campus across the entire university. So the thought that I had about building data management was, how do we make all of the data that we're collecting from our buildings more useful and help us to improve the sustainability decisions that we're making? So I'm focusing here on building mechanical systems. So the building that you're sitting in right now, it has an air handler up on the roof, and there's mechanical and air systems that are providing warm air to you right now. And on every one of those devices associated with those air handlers and everything else associated with providing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning to all of our buildings, there are numerous sensors, data that we are collecting across the board, whether it's temperature, pressure, flow, everything else that's associated with making sure that those buildings are working. And that's in every single building, and there are many of those sensors, hundreds of sensors that are in each building. And we're talking about more than 30 million square feet of space that we're collecting. And again, not just from University Park, but from across the entire Commonwealth, all of this data that we're collecting. How many data points do we have? We don't even know how many data points we have, but we know it's more than 1 million. Providing data continually. Those are the data points that we're collecting. And then every one of those data points is providing us data on a regular basis. So on some cases, we have that data updated every 5 seconds. So if you want a big data problem, here's a big data problem. So how do we use it? With all of that data, once we know that there is a problem, then we can go and look at data trends. We can go and look at equipment. When did it go offline? What its issues are. But the point here is that we can pick and choose what data we want to use, but we only use it after a problem has already come up. So what if? What if we can start seeing problems before occupants see them? If your temperature in your room is increasing, but you're not even sensitive to it yet, but AI could see that. Trends indicating an imminent failure of a piece of equipment. Inefficiencies. So maybe an AI could be programmed to say, this building could be run much more efficiently, and here's how you can do it. How about places where behavior change impacts the energy of the building? And a great example is the building you're sitting in right now, which has a problem with people using space heaters. So throughout the business building, our staff and faculty are using space heaters in their offices, which screws up the heating in the rest of that zone, because then the thermostat in that room thinks it's warmer than the room actually is, and actually calls for cooling. So you could have a space where somebody has a space heater blasting on them and cold air being introduced into that space. So of course that's impacting energy, but that's all driven by behavior change, and maybe an AI can help us identify when that's happening. And then there might be different criteria for different systems. Every single one of our buildings, it has a unique mechanical system. It's a little bit different everywhere, and so having a single solution is hard to come by. Every single building is going to have a different system, and it's going to have different criteria for making sure that we're operating it the most efficiently. So how do we deal with all of this right now? So we have all of this data, these millions of points of data that is being transmitted to a common server. It holds all of that data. We're calling it a data lake. And so here we go. We have this data lake of all of this information. And so how do we extract the useful components of this out of that data lake and implement it? And so what we're looking at now are these fault detection and analytics programs. And what they do is they'll transform that data from the data lake so that it can be easily understood, and then it allows users like the engineers that work for our group to access and manipulate that data. But the challenge is the same one that I brought up before, that people are only going to extract the data when there's a problem. Nobody is looking at problems that don't exist yet or haven't been reported. And that's something that perhaps AI could do, constantly looking at that data to tell us what the problems are before they ever happen, before they're ever apparent. So imagine this setup. You have these data sources on the far left. Those are the sensors that are providing it. The data goes into this gigantic data lake where all of this data in raw form is stored. And then you have a program that pulls the data out, transforms it into a useful format, and then makes it ready for queries. But maybe the AI at that far right-hand side, maybe the AI can already do those queries, can already look into that data and find problems that we aren't even looking for. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And
Sure.
with that, I want to take a second before we do our questions and answers. And we're going to actually have the food be brought in right now while we're doing this. But before we get into our Q&A, I want to just take a second to thank all of our Lightning Talk speakers who have taken time out of their day to come here and kind of share their expertise with you. So I just want to just thank you to each one of you. Now you have the opportunity to engage them and ask them any questions that you may have as it stands right now, as we're bringing in the food and getting ready for our small group conversations, where you can sit down and start thinking through your ideas based on what we just heard. What kind of questions do you have for our presenters, points of clarification or additional information you might want? And I will grab a microphone to bring to you as you raise your hand. Questions? Test, test. Here we go. So, yes, anyone you like.
This is a question for Margaret with regard to admissions. Margaret?
Yeah, you should be, she is on the other side, so you should be able to just go.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, with regard to admissions, we're thinking AI use collaboratively with humans. You wouldn't want to lose the human aspect of admissions, but do you see that kind of being a barrier? Because it's certainly a scalable idea that, every institution would have use for, but I could see it being kind of an immediate barrier that there might be apprehension of losing that human touch.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of different possibilities in the admissions realm, but I do think there is a lot of apprehension about the using that for good versus bad. And so I think that might be my only hesitation for you, but we can certainly talk a little bit more offline. you know, the idea of using data for enrollment is something we obviously do a lot now, but related to admissions decisions, I think that's what you sort of mean. You know, it gets tricky very quickly from an ethical standpoint of saying, even if you are trying to use that to help you, whether it's process admissions applications because of the volume, or if you're trying to recruit a certain population for a good reason, like athletes or minority students that you're trying to get more of them to come to campus, I think we've found that even talking about that can bring up some negative perceptions of people saying, well, how do we know that you're not going to deny students versus admit them? So does that make sense? Does that get a little bit at what you're saying?
Yeah, completely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you offline about it, because I think there's a lot of different possibilities, and we could talk through, sort of like Brad said, what's the why that you're getting at? Is it a time? Is it because it takes so long? Or, you know, what problem you're really trying to solve?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Additional questions? Yep. Pardon me.
This one's for Andrew Gutperlet, the last presenter. So you guys said you have this massive data lake from these sensors, and you guys are able to you analyze the data after breakdowns occur. Do you guys know how far back this data lake goes? Like 5 years, 1 year, last 6 months? Because I know that all that data takes up a lot of space. You might just delete it off your server after a while. I'm just wondering, like, how long, how wide this data lake is.
Not long enough, in my opinion. So it can go back. It depends on the data and it depends on the building, but a couple of years to maybe 4 or 5, but no more than that.
And do you guys have like record of when like you have equipment failures? Is that tracked like in a separate database at all?
Yeah, so we have a data a system that operates every one of our assets at the entire university. It's called Maximo, and we track data failures. I'm sorry, equipment failures in that database.
Thank you.
And I'll jump in there and ask, is that type of data, or at least subsets of it, would those be available to Nittany AI Challenge participants who would be interested in working in this space?
Yes, but I would caution them to be very specific about what data they want.
Yes, absolutely. Additional questions for our presenters while we have them? Yep. There you go.
This is a question for Megan. You were talking like earlier about like sustainability and all. Do you know like different resources on campus that for like the recycling centers that have like the data on the output of like what should be recycled and everything for campus?
Good question. Megan, if you're there, you might be muted.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. It's the last part. My internet has been going in and out. So can you repeat that?
Sure. So I was asking like data on like different recycling efforts about Penn State and like the % that's recycled versus not.
Yes. So that data is available on campus. It's not, I think we have like monthly data for what gets sent to the Center County facilities. And then we have like yearly roll-ups for it. It's not automatically collected, so it's more in, it's in a kind of Excel sheet kind of format.
Okay, thanks.
And again, Megan, would that be something that Sustainability Institute could assist with getting access to?
Yeah, the data lives in OPP, but we they've shared it with us in the past, so I don't see it being an issue. Also check out for some context on recycling and waste efforts, there's a website, wastestream.psu.edu. We actually had a university-wide task force over the last year and a half or so looking at waste at the university.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Additional questions? Yep.
Thanks. I had another question for Margaret Okar. So
Sure, go ahead.
So in the beginning of your talk, you talked about like the K through 12 setting, and that's somewhere you spent a lot of time with. My question is, when it comes to AI and just, like data and technology in general, has it been used to not only gauge things like test scores and understanding of material, but also some more abstract concepts like student engagement, focus, things like that? Has that been done before? And if so, to what success?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, there's a whole industry that you probably, or you may be familiar with, of this version called learning analytics. It's more specific to collecting the data about student performance. In the online space, just because I have a better handle on that and more recent handle on that, Canvas collects a lot of data about logins and assignments completed or lack of those things, and time and date stamps. Now, again, similarly to my point about admissions, student data is heavily protected for obvious reasons, but learning analytics on the back end is something I think that people are really interested in, and it's definitely a hot topic that people are talking about, certainly in higher ed, and I think probably the applications hold true in K-12 as well. I would say maybe not so much that I know of related to test scores for the same reason, because it is such personalized data.
Right.
Another thing you might want to look into is an area that I can also talk offline with you about. We have a project hopefully coming up very soon around something called predictive analytics. So predictive analytics is used in a lot of different industries for a lot of different reasons. We are trying to use it at the World Campus, hopefully, to help us understand some of that back-end student behavior, whether that's on a student level or more aggregate in nature, to say, how could we help the student or the prospect or the applicant? What could we do to help them move through the enrollment process? Again, something that can be applied to a lot of different things. It could predict student success, and again, can be used, I think, at any level throughout, the K-12, higher ed, et cetera. So I'd be happy to talk to you offline a little bit more, but I do think anything around learning analytics is definitely a great idea to look into a little bit further, for sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. Go here, and then we'll start here and we'll move on.
I have like a piggyback question off of that for Margaret. Would you find that there is maybe like a privacy issue or something in that area based off of like looking into maybe like learning disability patterns within like the K through 12 ages?
Yeah, I would imagine that there are, again, sort of going back to that ethical question of the using AI for good versus bad. I think, at least at the World Campus, this is something we even struggle with, because a lot of times adult students who are online students don't want to disclose whether they have a disability or not. And so even identifying students in that way, obviously that is completely their choice, but we have so many resources available that could help them. So I think disclosure is one thing for the adult population, but yes, like you said, at the K-12 level, and the fact that you have minors involved is a different level of, precaution. However, I do think that the more that technology is used in schools, and the more that families and customers, or whoever you fill in the blank for, is understanding how those types of things can help their student or their child. I do think, even in K-12, of course, so much more of the coursework and the experiences that they have really connect. Kids really like to use that technology. It's completely inherent and normal for them. So we're already collecting so much of that data. And so I do think that we're at kind of a tipping point of figuring out how can we collect that in a way that people feel comfortable without feeling exploited, if you will. And so I think, the other piece of that just came to my mind is I'm not exactly sure how virtual schools use learning and predictive analytics, but they are clearly collecting so much data, even compared to a traditional face-to-face classroom that does use a lot of technology. So I think anything in the education space, as Brad mentioned before, you can run into a lot of barriers because you're using personalized student data. However, I think that's almost why it's more important for us to consider and continue to pursue projects related to AI in this space for a lot of different reasons. So I hope that helps a little bit. I'm happy to talk to you offline as well.
It does, thanks.
Sure.
I have a question for Yuri. So you mentioned that when doing the AI work for agriculture, besides making predictions, we better to make some recommendations on how productions should be done. And then I would like to know how precise the recommendations will be, because if you want a very precise recommendation for example, for a specific farmer, then because the nature of agriculture is running against the time, and the weather changes, especially the weather. For example, if we want to use the weather data to both train and to do the prediction, then we might have to know the weather condition of a certain time in a certain location, and how precise the location should be, because maybe the weather differs a lot within different locations. In small area, do we still use the online API for weather, for example, for a town, or do we just collect data on the go?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's an extremely interesting topic. We typically we only now getting into doing very local predictions at like specific field level, but yeah, you should like the data that's available to support, and that's because kind of what our clients were interested in. So. But the data that's collected, environmental data, is actually available at very super granular level. So, you know, temperature, precipitation, soil moisture, evapotranspiration, potential evapotranspiration, all the data you need to do prediction is available at a very fine grain details. So I think it would be extremely interesting if you have local data on specific fields. I think, and if there's more than one field, you can actually train machine learning model on one set of data and then try to apply it at like super local, like one field, basically. Try to do this precision agriculture, you know, try to help with precision agriculture, basically do local recommendations. Yeah, the other thing I mentioned, and weather predictions, right now, weather predictions are available with high reliability 2 weeks in advance from NOAA, but there've been several projects doing this prediction for 1 month in advance, which is we're currently not using, but we're looking into using them. But it's mostly basically to, it's not going to help. We don't think it's going to help with accuracy, but it will help with unexpected events, like unexpected rain or unexpected drought. So I think it's a really interesting area right now. And you have more, if you have more questions, there's an email in the presentation, so you can ask me directly.
Thank you. And actually, after this session, when we all go home, I'll be sending contact information for everyone, and I will also be sending out the presentation. So you'll have all of that and availability to ask questions. You know, right now, this is really important, the talking and asking questions and getting some feedback. But at the same time, there's food sitting in the back of the room. So what I'm going to say is, if you can, if you are hungry, if you want to grab some food, if you want to quietly, while we're still continuing this on, go back and grab some food. I am not going to cut off this Q&A because it's too important. But if you want to sneak through and grab your food very quietly and come back to your seat, we'll keep on going. Yes.
I was going to mention too, Brad, I think you mentioned earlier that Darren is on the line if they want to send anything to the chat.
Yes, then they should be. I've got my notification set, so if anything comes through, we should get a ding. So, like I said, we'll keep on questions, but if quietly as possible, keep on grabbing some food. Okay, yes.
Hi, I have a question about with Margaret.
Yep, good. Go ahead.
Sure.
Hi, I'm a student. Like I used to create a AI chatbot on my second semester. I think it is about a new student AI guide. Is to help students to get enrolled the class. Like what are the common questions about the enrollment? So I was wondering if you have some like databases about these new student common questions, so I can to make the database bigger. Yeah.
Sure, great question. Thank you. Yes, we actually are working on that project right now with our vendor who does our collects our all the interactions that our admissions counselors have with our prospects and applicants. And actually, the Nittany AI Alliance folks are helping us figure out if we even have enough data in there to create something like a chatbot or use it for other things. So we would not be able to share that data with an outside outside of our environment at this point because, again, of the student data. And I wouldn't discourage you from moving forward with your idea of a chatbot for admissions, for those types of things, because I think a lot of universities could do it. I just want you to know that we're kind of in the process of doing that. And I do think the data piece would be a challenge here at Penn State. I think, thinking about that in other terms of those frequently asked questions and things like that makes perfect sense. I think a couple things to consider as well is there's a lot of question around financial aid. There's a lot of questions around transfer credits. And that's not just at Penn State, those are national issues. I think another thing that to think about too is that the choice for students to go to colleges and the number of colleges is becoming an increasingly overwhelming, endeavor. It's great to have choice, but certainly for students that don't have a lot of experience either going to college, they are finding what those kind of key requirements are even before they get to what you're proposing idea-wise of enrolling is very overwhelming. And so there are, credible places, there's some not so credible places that are trying to take advantage of people. So I think even another idea might be too, to think about how could a system like that help aggregate information from a variety of public sources, either to help people choose institutions, narrow down their institutions. Something like that might also make, provide you with some more publicly available data. One of the things that we ran into in our Nittany AI project with transfer credits was that we personally didn't have a ton of technical expertise, right? So I would encourage you to, it sounds like you personally probably have that and build that very strongly. We were looking for and needed some skill sets trying to, pull information off of those public sites And that was a challenge for us that we really couldn't surmount. So just a couple of ideas for you there. But I do think your initial idea has potential in a lot of different possible ways. So again, happy to talk to you offline too.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll also offer our assistance. Last year, we had a team that did a chatbot for new student orientation. A lot of those entry-level questions, common questions across students. So I can connect you up with the team from the past so you can learn from what they did and what they learned. Okay, absolutely. Yep.
Hi, I had a question for Matt Ferrari. If he's
Yep, I saw Matt still on there, so you should
Okay,
be able to
there
go
we go.
ahead.
I'm still here.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I had a quick question. So what I found interesting about your talk was how data acquisition is such like a difficult problem in these parts of the world that you're working in. And so my question is this: if we have these things, you know, these outbreaks that move so fast throughout populations and across landscapes, when it comes to understanding them better, what percentage of the work you do is related to taking in data and then looking at that data and the behaviors that it goes through and then using that to make predictions? Or do you take that data and try to make simulations almost to get ahead of it? Is there a lot of simulation work there, or is it mostly just study of the data, or both?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And really the answer is there's both. We do. So let me answer that from a research perspective, right? Because there's the research side of what we do, and then there's the operational side of what we do. And from a research perspective, more often than not, what we're doing is a retrospective view of a real-time engagement, right? So we can take all the data that has been collected post hoc, and then try and go back in time and you know, sort of replay that as like a desktop exercise, right? And there's been a you know, I think what a lot of people were doing prior to I think the last few years was really only doing retrospective views with the full picture, right? And not actually replaying those replaying crises in sort of simulated real time, right? So they were actually biasing the interpretation of the situation because they were basically allowing themselves to see the future, right? Rather than restricting themselves only to the data that's available. And I think that becomes really important in sort of recreating the realistic user experience that you would need to develop any product or workflow or what have you for how to integrate that data, right? So I think actually putting realistic constraints on data availability, communications pathways, all those kinds of things is actually really critical in designing a viable product that could actually be implemented in the future, right? So that's the way we've been dealing with sort of looking at things in the past. The other thing that we've been working quite hard on is the future simulation side of things, which is basically, you know, we play war games.
Yeah.
Right. In the same, you know, in
Exactly.
the same, you know, and we play those simulations out into the future. And what we've been doing we've actually been using reinforcement learning algorithms to try and develop these state-dependent intervention policies, right? So what we're advocating for is not a one-off. If I see a crisis, then I do something, right? But rather, if I see a crisis, I measure something about the crisis, and I use that measurement to partition between intervention A, B, or C. Right. So actually what we're trying to create is a rule-based algorithm that says, if the system is in this state, then we take this action, and we keep building that up. Right. So we actually have been working on integrating epidemic models into those kinds of wrapping epidemic models into that kind of a reinforcement learner. Right, to give ourselves to elucidate those state-dependent policies that perhaps a human hadn't thought of in advance, right? And these then become things like allocation problems, right? If the outbreak becomes so big that I'm going to get overwhelmed with action A, right, because it's costly, then I would switch over to action B because it performs better when the outbreak is large, right?
Right.
So those then become the kinds of things that we're trying to learn in that context, right? So that's retrospective analysis, forward simulations to try and come up with, to try and elucidate policies, right? And then we also then have the actual real time when a crisis actually happens. We sort of throw research out the window, right? And all the activities then are just trying to focus on how can we help integrate what's happening right now as smoothly as possible, right? And that's where things like, you know, natural language processing and automated data cleaning and things like that, and error checking, those kinds of algorithms become much more important, because you don't have the luxury of taking the time to clean everything as well as possible and really do the deep dive. It's really this, you know, it's really sort of a quick and dirty thing. And so if we can, you know, rapidly identify patterns. I think one of the other speakers talked about identifying features within time series data that would, you know, that's a problem that we're dealing with right now during the outbreak in Congo, is parsing through a whole bunch of surveillance data that they have to try and automate it in an automated way, identify here's a county region where the outbreak is steeply increasing, and here's a place where it's not, right? We just, you know, we need to create a rule set that a computer can read that in and reduce the set of images that a human then will look at, right? And then a human will look at it and say, okay, that's the place we're going to send people.
Right.
So the real-time stuff in an actual crisis tends to be really quick and dirty. And we then use that experience to say, all right, can we build a better algorithm that can be in place in the event that this happens again?
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Additional questions? Oh, yep.
So this is a question for anyone. One thing I'm thinking about is, let's say you have your data and then you build your model, you test it and validate it. And so ultimately you want your model to make a prediction. So what are your thoughts about, what are your thought process of calculating the costs of getting the prediction right and the costs of getting the prediction wrong?
And we'll leave that open for anyone who's brave enough to jump in. Although, Matt, I will say your face is up on the screen right now.
For me, I worry quite a bit about getting things wrong. And I think really we did a side project. This is somewhat unrelated, but this is unrelated to the crisis setting I was talking about. But this was a clinical informatics setting, right, where we were looking at patterns of how physicians prescribe antibiotics and antimalarials in clinic settings where there isn't an existing diagnostic lab, right? So kids come in and they present with symptoms, and the clinician has to make a decision about what drugs to give that kid, right? But they don't have the infrastructure to take a blood test and get a gold standard diagnosis that says this kid really has a bacterial infection, so I should give them an antibiotic, right? There's a setting where where we actually really needed to take. We could train an algorithm to look at all the past, right, and say, if the kid presents with this set of symptoms, how likely was the doctor to get themselves right, to get the diagnosis right? And we could come up with something that could predict the best possible, but it still wasn't perfect, right? And then what we had to do was take that basically discrimination analysis and pass that through a 2x2 matrix that was a cost matrix, right? That says what's the cost associated, what's the benefit associated with getting the diagnosis right and assigning the drug correctly, and what's the cost associated with getting the diagnosis wrong and offering and giving that kid the wrong drug, right? And what we actually found was, by looking at the patterns of doctors doing prescriptions, is that in that setting, doctors tended to basically be over prescribing because they were trying, they placed such a strong cost on the consequences of under treating a child. So if they didn't know whether a child was presenting with malaria or a bacterial infection, they would give them both drugs, because in that setting, the consequences of a day or two lag in prescription meant a really high likelihood that child would die, right? So that's a very context specific balance of cost and benefit. If you told that same story in a US based clinic, we would be talking about what's the societal cost of over prescription of antibiotics and things like antibiotic resistance, right? But in these two settings, in a low income clinic where there's high risk of child mortality versus a clinic in central Pennsylvania where we have much more facility for treating symptoms if things go wrong really quickly, right? The balance of that cost benefit becomes really dramatic, and in fact overwhelms all the decision making. The clinical decision model was completely overwhelmed, right, by the cost and benefit in that decision matrix. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Was there anyone else who was chomping at the bit to jump in on answering the same question?
Yeah, this is Yuri. So with us, I would say, yes, we always have wrong. Sometimes we do wrong predictions, but I think our approach is to do very rigorous statistical approach. When we do modeling, we leave out data in area and in years. So we do, we make sure we're not just interpolating, but extrapolating our predictions. And yeah, if you have solid statistical background in your model, you do a prediction, and that's your scientific result. And sometimes your prediction is better than the ground truth that you're trying to predict. Like couple of months ago, USDA revised their estimate of the soy production in US in 2018, and they matched crop prediction from 2 years ago, and we were really happy with that.
John. There you go.
Hey, so first of all, I thought that was a great question to ask, and really liked Matt's answer as well. I think anytime you're in the field of AI for good or blank for good, whatever it might be, and specifically anytime you're probably more likely to find yourself dealing with populations who are living on the edge, whatever you want to call on the edge, where the difference between something working and something not working can be calamitous, potentially. I think you all have to keep in mind how high the stakes are for your stakeholders as you're doing it. And that should not be a reason for you not to take on this challenge here. It should just be the reason that you are slower to implement and more cautious when it goes to wide scale implementation of what you do. But I think we need, especially young minds, taking on these challenges and figuring out what the risks are and running these models and putting more time on it. But absolutely positively think about who the stakeholders are and what the impact is on them, both if you get it right and if you get it wrong.
Any last questions? Yep.
One to ask Matthew again. So you guys said with your data aggregation, like getting data about these breakouts and how it's kind of, you have sparse data sets. But it does sound like you are getting data from somewhere. So is this like clinicians that are already in the country that are reporting symptoms to a database? Is this from Google searches in the area, the people searching symptoms of these diseases? Is it from images scraped or like tweets? Like, where is this bare minimum amount of data coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I work primarily with national ministries of health, and so they have some sort of workflow for notifiable diseases, right? And that workflow can be that can operationally be either fast or slow, right? So every child that so around the world, every child that presents with a basket of symptoms, right? That defines measles, so that's a fever and a rash and either a runny nose or runny eyes or a cough, right? Is supposed to be reported. It's supposed to be recorded at the health facility, and then usually on a weekly basis, it's then reported up to the next political hierarchy. So, county and then to state and then to national level, and then recorded in some kind of electronic format, right? So that's the data that we're oftentimes working with. And again, the delays in that can be substantial in terms of what the local scale capacity is for recording and passing that information up the chain, right? So really, just data transfer actually becomes a real limiting factor in many of these cases where you don't have hardwired connections for passing data along. Things have to be translated from paper-based records up to into electronic records. One of the things, and this is again where this is a bit of a soapbox issue for me, but I think very often when we talk about these kinds of problems, we talk about designing solutions for systems where data already exists, right? As opposed to designing solutions that can be implemented if we get more data. And if that's the case, then actually the decision to get more data actually becomes a part of the operational process, right? So in Médecins Sans Frontières, if an outbreak happens, right, then one of the things that they do is they actually deploy an army of epidemiologists that go out into the field and help facilitate data collection, data recording, and data transfer. So they're actually making that decision to put people in the field and speed up the data gathering and data collection and improve the data quality, right? So that actually becomes now an important operational decision. Where do you go? What's the right data? What's the most efficient data to be collected, right? I think that's a really important part of this whole process, so that we're not only addressing questions for which the data has already been gathered, right? I think there are a lot of problems where there's a really important need for evidence-based solutions, and the first step to implementing those evidence-based solutions is to go and gather the data, right? And that creates this bit of a chicken and egg problem, but we actually sort of need to both build the algorithms that will use the data as a justification for going out and collecting the data, and let those two things work in tandem, right? So anyway, so that's maybe a more abstract answer to what you asked for, but yes, there are national registries of different cases of febrile illness or diarrheal disease or malaria or what have you, right? Those kinds of things. But then also we do a lot of work with remote sense data that allows us to identify where people are moving around, things like cell phone data to identify areas of movement or areas of high movement, satellite data to identify where cities are, where locations are, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that, what I'm going to do, so as you can tell, we put it on the agenda a while. So what we're going to do now, though, is I want to get a quick sense from you in the room, kind of where you sit. So if I can just real quick pull in the hands. So how many of you in here feel you've got a pretty good sense of the idea you want to work on at this point? Okay. How many of you in here are technical experts and you're just looking for someone to connect up to because the idea is not as big of a deal to you as working in the AI space? Okay. All right.
It's okay to raise your hand for that one.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's not a criticism whatsoever.
It doesn't. It makes you
person that just left said the exact same thing, that he had to leave. He was looking for a team.
Excellent. So with that said, and with that response, what we're going to do is we're going to, for as valuable as it is, and for as much as we appreciate everyone being on the call and our subject matter experts, we're going to thank them one last time and let them all go and move to some work here in the room. So thank you again so much. And I just noticed that I was on mute. So we were giving all of you remotely, all of our presenters, a huge round of applause and a thank you for being here. So I'm going to ask us to do that one more time while they can actually hear us. Thank you. What we're going to do now is we're going to let all of our experts go. You can feel free to log off, although I'm going to tell you, you are probably going to hear from some of the people in the room over the next coming weeks. So I know all of you have offered your assistance and guidance, and perhaps if you have time, some mentorship along the way. So we appreciate that in advance, and I will share all of your information with our attendees. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day wherever you happen to be. Thank you.